Skyward, a Skyward Series parody by M.G. Bayer. M.G. Bayer. Read by Conrad Mishuk. Only fools climb to the surface before the space whales deemed them worthy enough to see the light. That's what Mother always said. She also said a lot of other things, but those weren't as important. For instance, she told me to stop leaving dead rats outside her bedroom as gifts. But no way was I going to listen to that. Dead rats make the best gifts. I wondered if there were rats on the surface. The surface was an enigma to me. I had imagined what it might be like over and over again, but I had never seen it. Only the select few who were deemed worthy got to venture there. Maybe one day, I too would be worthy. I remember the first time my dad tried to take me to see the surface in secret. He wasn't supposed to do that, but he said no one would find out. Who was I to argue? He took me deep in the caverns. It was just the two of us. He knew I had the propensity for getting into trouble or getting lost. So he brought his light line with him. A light line was a thing that looked like a pen, but when you turned it on, a tiny red dot appeared on the surface at which it was pointed. I found it mesmerizing. My dad knew that wherever he shone his light line, I would follow, and that way, he could keep me away from danger. I packed my backpack for the journey with the necessities, my stuffed bear named Lobotomy, my paper airplane, and my gaping wound kit. A girl needed to be prepared. With my hands tight on my backpack straps, I gazed down at the rocky floor of the cave and followed the red dot my dad kept aimed at the ground. I loved our walks together like this. We walked until the rocks turned into a strange, cold metal that smelled like poop in a tin can. "Spinster, look up," my dad whispered. I raised my head to see a metal circle on the ceiling. It had mystical carvings all over it and tiny holes through which beams of light forced their way down into the darkness. The light was piercing, wholly unlike the soft yellow glow of our underground lanterns. The surface, the sky. I grinned and stood on my tiptoes to see. My dad reached down, put his strong hands in my armpits, and lifted me up so I could look through the holes better, which didn't help. The light was so bright that it hurt to keep my eyes open. I clearly wasn't worthy enough to see the surface yet. "It's too bright, Dad. It hurts." "Ah, of course it is. You've never seen sunlight before. I'm so sorry about that, Spinster. So sorry. I'm working as hard as I can to make it up to you." My dad carefully set me back down on the ground and looked deep into my eyes. "Spinster, I know you won't understand this fully, but I want you to know that I'm going to get you out of here." "Out of where?" I asked, tilting my head to the side like an inquisitive puppy. "Out of the caves, sweetheart. The HOA hasn't been telling the truth. Don't believe everything they say. I promise I will get you out of here so you can live a normal life." HOA stood for Helpful Overseers of All. They were the worthy ones chosen to communicate directly with the space whales and enact their will. "But where else would we go, Dad? If we venture to the surface before we are worthy, the knell will come for us all." I was very confused. My dad closed his eyes, let out a big sigh, and whispered, "That's right, sweetheart. Forget what I said." He leaned down and kissed me tenderly on the forehead. I noticed a tear stream down his cheek, which was odd. "Can we go home now, Dad?" I asked. "It smells like poop." He laughed softly. "Of course, Spinster. Let's go home." He got out his light line and led the way back. Lobotomy bounced playfully in my backpack as I chased after the red dot on the floor. As we traveled, I tried to make sense of what he had said. Out of the caves? What was he thinking? The knell would know I wasn't worthy yet. The knell were watching everything from up above, watching and listening. They could sense when our population got too big simply by eavesdropping. When this happened, they infiltrated our caverns to wreak havoc. Or worse, they dropped a lifebuster bomb on our Spam and cottage cheese storage room. Everyone knew that life wasn't worth living without Spam and cottage cheese. The Nell would stop at nothing to annihilate us. This is why the HOA kept us separated into clans, and why the entire collective spoke only in whispers. Good, quiet lips mean no apocalypse. I knew the saying well. All children did. Mima had told me many stories about the last 70 years on our planet, Gastritis. She had been here since the beginning. We'd crashed on Gastritis when she was a young girl, after our people fled Old Earth, which was destroyed by the Nell. The details on how we got from Old Earth to Gastritis were wishy-washy, but I was sure it would all make sense once I inherited the vast knowledge of the universe stored in the minds of the space whales. Once we got to Gastritis, we'd been forced to live underground to survive. Children were tested and chosen to go live away from their families at the Basic Clan, to be trained as part of the pilot program to defend ourselves against the Nell. Since I dreamed of being selected as a member of this program, I once asked where the Basic Clan was and if I could go see it to help visualize my destiny. "That's the whole point, Spinster," the HOA board member had said. "It must remain hidden. We can't just let anyone go see the Basic Clan. You must earn it. For now, your job is to stay down here in the Ignoramus clan and remember that good, quiet lips mean no apocalypse." Smart girl. I had to admit, it all made perfect sense. I had lots of questions, and the HOA board always had perfect answers to everything. I had the greatest respect for them. I knew that if I proved my strength by being a pilot program member, then I would be rewarded with being part of the superiority, which meant I could inherit the vast knowledge of the universe stored in the minds of the space whales. The superiority was the ultimate goal for all of us. I didn't know what the superiority was, but I knew it would make all my dreams come true. Plus, space whales. I took my eyes away from the red dot of the light line. "Dad," I whispered, "I want to be part of the pilot program, just like you." My dad looked at me for a moment before he spoke. "Is that so?" "Yes, then I'll be worthy enough to be part of the superiority, and none of the other kids will make fun of me for carrying lobotomy around in my backpack." That made my dad hug me for some stupid reason, even though I was just telling the truth. But I hugged him back because parents like stuff like that. Dad's breath caught, and I thought he might be crying. "We used to live out there among the stars," he whispered. "That's where we belong, not in these caverns. Set your sights on something higher, something more grand." "Don't be silly, Dad. It's grander, not more grand." The rocks around us shifted. Out from behind them appeared the faces of 6 members of the HOA board. They looked straight at my dad and slowly walked towards him. "Call sign Chase Lounge, we need you," the tallest HOA board member uttered in an eerie tone of voice. "We need you to come with us to help defend the collective against the Nell. They're coming." My dad's face went white. No, my daughter, Spinster, she needs me." "You've chosen your path, Chase Lounge. Don't make us talk some sense into you." The tallest HOA board member brought out a feather duster and held it in front of him in a menacing way. I didn't like that. Dad cursed under his breath. "Whales!" I hope the space whales didn't hear that. They didn't like it when we took their names in vain. One HOA board member was wearing a strange device on their hip, and a scratchy voice came through it. "Do you have him yet? Don't dawdle. Take care of it. Over." The voice was much louder than a whisper, but none of them seemed concerned. The HOA board member answered, "Almost got him. Over." I waited silently, holding my breath, hoping my dad would go with them quickly. If the Ignoramus clan was infiltrated by the Nell, well, I wasn't sure what would happen, but it would be bad. "Dad, we need you. You must stop them," I pleaded. The tallest HOA board member nodded in agreement and smiled in a weird way that I didn't quite understand. Your daughter is right, Chaise Lounge. We need you. Now come with us. Why was my dad hesitating? We were supposed to be proud to defend ourselves against the Nell. That's what he was chosen for. That's what he trained for. That's what I longed to do with my own life as well. What was going on? My dad took a decided step forward and then looked back at me. He reached out and handed me his lifeline. Promise you'll go back to your mother straight away. Don't dally. I promise. Now go save us, Dad. He stepped towards the tallest HOA board member, who smiled again in that weird way. The other HOA board member spoke into his device. Got him. Chaise Lounge out. Over. They all walked back in the direction we came from, and I took note that Basic Clan must be that way. I had finally learned one of the secrets. Well, kind of. My dad looked back at me with tears streaming down his face. He yelled, "Claim the stars, spinster!" as he was dragged away. What did that mean? My dad was so weird sometimes. I, of course, immediately broke my promise. I snuck after them, clutching my dad's light line, and watched until they were completely out of view. I heard my dad sobbing the entire way. Why didn't he want to defend us? We were supposed to be defiant against the Nell while doing exactly what the HOA board members told us to do at all times without questioning. I didn't understand. Finally, showing a rare moment of good judgment, I decided I'd better do what he had told me to do. I used the light line to lead myself back home through the tunnels. I figured if I hurried, I could get back in time to listen to the evening broadcast on our single communal radio that only worked when the crank lady operated the crank that was on the wall next to it. Unfortunately, I missed the broadcast. I managed to get lost, despite leading myself with the light line. However, if I had managed to make it back in time, I would have heard in that broadcast that my dad had been banished to the surface for refusing to defend the collective against the Nell. We all knew what happened if you ventured to the surface before you were deemed worthy. There was no way that he survived. By the time I got home, my dad was gone, and I'd been branded the daughter of a lily-livered chicken heart. Chapter 1. It is a single truth universally acknowledged that a single girl in possession of a good slingshot must be in want of a rat. And that was exactly my aim as I stalked the enemy carefully through the cavern. I'd taken off my boots so they wouldn't squeak, removed my socks so I wouldn't slip, and stuffed a sock in my mouth so I wouldn't speak. I froze in a crouch staring at my enemy, the rat. In its place, I imagined a Nell. I didn't know what a Nell looked like since I'd never seen one and there weren't any pictures of them. So I imagined them looking like a regular human, only inside out. With a steady hand, agonizingly slow, I raised my slingshot, held my breath, and fired. Yes! I rushed forward to claim my prize, one dead rat. It was so much easier to hit them if they were already dead. Took me years to figure that out. I used to hunt live rats, but that was far too difficult. I planned to leave this dead one outside my mother's room as a present. She loved it when I did that. Dead rats were her love language. I glanced at my wrist. The time was 2 freckles past a hair. I needed to head back. I couldn't miss too much of the school day, even though I'd already completed all of the foresight pamphlets for my age group. I slung my rat sack over my shoulder, picked up my slingshot, and followed my hand-drawn map of the caverns that I did in crayon on the back of a napkin. It was some of my best artistic work, if I do say so myself. I was always sad to leave these silent caverns behind. They reminded me of my dad. 9.5 years had passed since that fateful day when he was banished for being a lily-livered chicken heart. Everything had basically gone to the crapper since then. The other kids mocked me and stared at me and made impressively accurate chicken noises they thought I didn't hear. I hated it. The only way I had to defend my family's honor was to formulate genius counter-arguments while pooping in the chamber pot, so I would be prepared for insults in the future. The more digestive distress I was under, the more time I had to do this. There was always a silver lining to constipation. I stopped at that familiar intersection my dad had shown me. I stared up at the metal circle on the ceiling all covered in designs. I assumed they were scientific patterns or ancient maps of the galaxy. That spot was the farthest I had ever traveled when he took me there. But since then I had explored so much more. It turned out there were metal circles all over the place. All of them had the same number of tiny holes where light sometimes snuck in. And around all of them it smelled like poop in a tin can. My imagination ran wild when I stood underneath some of those circles. One time I thought I imagined an angry woman's voice yelling, "I'm walking here!" followed by fearsome horns honking repeatedly. And then another time it sounded like huge creatures were running across it, like the dinosaurs from old Earth. My imagination was far too powerful for me. There was a small part of me that wanted to believe the metal circles were portals to another world. But that was ridiculous. The ground began to shake, so I braced myself against the wall. I was used to this. The HOA taught us that the caverns shook when the Nell ships went by on the surface. That last big battle my dad almost fought in was considered our greatest victory because the Nell had not infiltrated us since that day. However, they still went by on a very consistent daily schedule for monitoring. Bracing ourselves against the walls was so much a part of our daily routine that we hardly noticed anymore. The shaking stopped and I was able to continue onward. I made a pit stop at home first to drop the dead rat outside Mom's bedroom, and then found Meemaw rolling mushroom wraps right outside our home. Meemaw had lost nearly all her sight a few years ago. Her eyes had gone a milky white that matched her generally mysterious vibe. She was hunched over, working intensely with her stick-like arms.
"Oi, that sounds like Spinster," she said. "How many rats did you get today?"
"Just one. Already left it for Mother."
"Sit,
Meemaw whispered as she started munching on one of her mushroom wraps. Meemaw said the mushrooms provided her with the perfect medicine for her ailments, if prepared in the correct way, and other people seemed to agree. There were about 20 regulars who appeared outside her home each week to give her things in exchange for mushroom wraps. I doubted the HOA approved of this, but Meemaw always seemed happier when she had her medicine, so I didn't say anything. I settled down and started helping Meemaw dice and wrap the mushrooms like she had taught me when I was little. She was clean and efficient as she worked by touch, taking breaks to take a bite.
"Close your eyes, Spinster. Listen to the stars."
Meemaw always said stuff like that when she took her medicine.
"Listen to the stars, Spinster. Imagine yourself flying."
I sighed. I loved Meemaw, but once she got like this, her company was really boring. I decided to humor her. I closed my eyes and tipped my head back, face towards the ceiling of the cavern, far above. I thought, just for a moment, that I heard something out there. My imagination, perhaps? A distant, pure sound? I let out a long, calming sigh as whatever I heard suddenly got louder. Turns out our neighbor had a bad case of gas and his toots were quite resonant in the cave. Oh well.
"We will return to the sky."
Meemaw was now completely gone.
"Spinster, you're supposed to be working on your foresight pamphlets."
My mother came out of her room, put her hand on her hips, and rolled her eyes.
"And for the last time, stop bringing me dead rats. It's such a weird thing to do, not to mention unsettling."
"You're welcome, Mother." I knew she loved them. She just liked to play this game with me. We'd been playing it for years. She was right about school, though. I smiled, then headed to what I hoped would be my last day of class. Ever. For tomorrow, I got to take the pilot program entrance test and finally fulfill my life's one true purpose: joining the superiority and inheriting the vast knowledge of the universe stored in the minds of the space whales. I was on my way. Chapter 2. No one knew precisely what the test consisted of. Like most things, the HOA kept it shrouded in mystery. Those board members thrived on mystery. I could relate because I also liked to keep people guessing. What will Spinster Nightlight do next? No one knew, not even me. I hear that you are quite the explorer, Miss Nightlight. I turned around to see one of the HOA board members right behind me as I walked to the pilot program testing room. Yes, I said. I like to hunt rats to leave outside my mother's door as gifts because I've felt responsible for her happiness ever since my dad died. Interesting. We have need for people like you, Miss Nightlight. She smiled. You do? Oh, yes. You would be perfect for the very important job of pilot, I know. No. Keeper of sanitation. Huh? Sanitation? Yes, we need keepers of sanitation who are skilled at doing service runs in far-off caverns. We need rugged types for those trips. If you want a job, I'm offering one. Isn't sanitation all about gathering chamber pots and stuff? Sounds gross. No thanks. I'm going to be part of the pilot program. The entrance test is hard, Miss Nightlight. Not many pass it. I'm offering you a guaranteed job. Are you sure you don't want to consider it? There are many ways to serve the collective and prove your worthiness. No way I'm spending my life cleaning poo. Count me out. The HOA board member shook her head and walked off. I backed up against the wall and folded my arms tightly against my chest, but that hurt because I had my light line tucked in my jumpsuit pocket, and it was pokey, so I put my arms down. Everyone knew I wanted to be in the pilot program. Why would they offer me a job in sanitation? And what did my cave skills have anything to do with that? I was both frustrated and confused. They're not going to let you in, a girl whispered as she came down the hall. I glanced over at her. Ugh, it was Dia. Her name was short for diarrhea. In our clan, it was fashionable to name children after a significant event that happened during childbirth. It was supposed to be something historical, but her parents interpreted the custom a bit differently. It would be easier to avoid calling her by her full name if she wasn't so dang annoying all the time. Anyone can take the entrance test, Dia. I filled in the rest of her name in my mind. Yeah, and who do you think decides who passes it? Diarrhea whispered. It's not exactly fair. The descendants of the prime cave dwellers always get in no matter what. You don't think that's odd? I glanced at the sculpture of the prime cave dwellers down in the foyer. It was constructed of tin cans and glistened in the lamplight. The sculpture artist had peeled most of the canned vegetable labels off the can, but some bits remained. There was much debate on whether that was an oversight or an artistic choice. The prime cave dwellers depicted were the pilot program members who had saved us all during the last big battle, despite my dad chickening out. His sculpture was not among them, of course. No one would sculpt a lily-livered chicken heart. I had never thought about the fact that all their kids had been chosen for the program. That did seem odd. Gah, diarrhea was so annoying. Why did she have to bring that up right now before I was about to take the entrance test? She was trying to throw me off my game. You're lying, I whisper-shouted a bit too loudly. I scared a cockroach that was scurrying nearby so badly it fell off the wall. Whatever, she shrugged and walked away nonchalantly. It couldn't be true. I raced down the hall to the testing room as fast as my little legs could carry me, shoving diarrhea out of the way as I passed her. The HOA board member who was there to administer the test was one of the same ones who had dragged my dad away down in the deep caves all those years ago. "Is it true?" I whisper-yelled in his face. I was fuming, but quiet lips were still important. "Is what true, Miss Nightlight? Do you decide who passes and who fails the test based on our parentage?" I narrowed my eyes at him. "Miss Nightlight, you have to understand this is a delicate issue and—" "Is it true?" I whispered as loud as I could. The HOA board member drew his lips into a thin line and didn't answer. "Is it all lies, then?" I asked. "The talk of unity and of proving ourselves worthy with our skills and finding the right place and serving the collective? It's complicated." He lowered his voice to an almost inaudible whisper. "Look, spinster, why don't you skip the test today? You can work in sanitation and then you don't have to worry about passing or failing." "So I can scrape poo out of chamber pots my whole life? No way. I need to be in the pilot program. I need to impress the space whales." The HOA board member looked angry. "I'm sorry, Miss Nightlight. This was never going to be. I wish someone had dissuaded you of the notion long ago. We cannot risk you chickening out like your father did." In that moment, everything came crashing down around me. Lies, all lies. I felt like a fool. I bet everyone else knew I would never be in the program, and they had all been secretly laughing at me this whole time. Laughing in that evil way that goes, "Bwah ha 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 ha," instead of "ha ha 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 ha." What an idiot I had been. Of course they weren't going to let me pass the test. I wanted to rage. I wanted to throw lobotomy across the room and scream until my lungs popped like balloons. Instead, I ran. Chapter 3. Down in the deep cave where my dad had been taken, I stared up at the dots of light shining through the tiny holes in the metal circle on the ceiling until I could see them even when I closed my eyes. I breathed in the pungent tin can poop smell that reminded me so much of my dad. I took my light line out of my jumpsuit pocket and turned it on. The little red dot appeared on the wall across from me. I wiggled it around to make fun designs. Meemaw said we brought these with us to gastritis, that they were tools used by workers on old Earth. I wasn't supposed to have one since they were just for full pilots who had earned their wings. But, luckily, it looked just like a pen, so I could keep it hidden. When I was stressed, I liked to shine the light line in front of me and follow it wherever it went, so I could pretend I was walking around in the dark with my dad, like when I was young. I shone the light line and followed it into a cavern filled with curly mushrooms that I had never been in before. The floor was half rock and half metal, like the circles on the ceilings. There were no lanterns this far back in the caves, so it was really dark. I had never feared the darkness. I couldn't be afraid of anything if I was going to be a pilot. If I was going to be a pilot. I looked upward, trying to push away the feelings of loss. In just a few hours, everyone else would be taking the entrance test. I bet even diarrhea would pass. A quiet rumbling pulled me away from my morning. It was the Nell doing a monitoring pass. I went over to the wall and braced myself. The floor shook violently. More violently than usual. The cavern trembled as if in outrage, and dust fell from the ceiling, followed by bits of rock. What was happening? They hadn't dropped a life buster, had they? Had my lips not been quiet enough? I'd whisper-yelled quite a lot that day. I snuggled up as close to the wall as I could as rocks kept falling and the cave kept shaking and shaking. Forget the test, I thought. I just need to make it out of here alive. As I prayed to the whales and prepared myself to die, my dad's last words echoed in my mind. Set your sights on something higher, something more grand. claim the stars. He really should have said grander. More grand wasn't grammatically correct, and it was a shame that was my last memory of him. The trembling ceased and the dust settled around me. Phew, that was a close one. I blinked dust from my eyes and brushed the debris off my jumpsuit. I was so covered in bits that you could hardly read my name on the identification patch. Our entire collective wore identical jumpsuits, so it was practical to have our names on them. My collective-issued fanny pack, which was usually beige, was now a dusty brown as well. I was a mess. A scrabbling sound came from nearby. A rat? I was an expert rat locator, so I spotted the fella in seconds. He scurried up some rubble and through a hole in the wall that hadn't been there before. It looked about big enough for me to crawl through. I raised my light line and pointed it in the direction I wanted to go. Peering through the hole, I could see that the room on the other side seemed to be made entirely of metal. It also had a much stronger tin can poop smell. Love you, Dad. I crawled through the hole and stood up on the other side. It took my brain a moment to realize what I was seeing. The cave was vast. There was a dark river running through the middle of it, and a few odd lanterns on the opposite side. The river was surrounded by strange metal railings that were more complex and robust than anything in the collective. It looked like ancient alien technology or something. And there, nestled in the corner, was a ship? Chapter 4. At least I was pretty sure it was a ship. I'd never seen a ship before, not even in a painting or tin can sculpture. But this was unlike any technology I had ever seen. It had to be one. What else could it be? It probably crash-landed here, like we did. It was made of smooth, shiny silver metal poles that sort of crisscrossed in the middle. There was clearly a cockpit with a small triangular seat and places for 2 feet down below. There were 2 circular black wheels, each with a flurry of criss-crossy bits in the middle. And above the back wheel there was a sturdy silver storage compartment. Sitting in the compartment was a black box that looked so technologically advanced that only Meemaw's mushroom-enhanced mind wouldn't be blown. For a moment, I forgot about the test. My own ship, my secret, my discovery, my precious. I went over to the ship and ran my fingers across its dusty metal. I reverently gripped what must have been the steering mechanism. I didn't know what it was called, but it had handle-like things, and it was bar-shaped, so I just referred to it as the handlebars. It probably had some fancy scientific name, but that would do for now. The handlebars had thin, colorful strips of stiff fabric hanging from either side. I wasn't sure of their function, but they probably had something to do with aerodynamics. The ship was leaning against the wall, so I pulled it upright. It immediately fell over again. It seemed to be in disrepair. I investigated the storage compartment at the back of the ship. What is this, I wondered, rapping my knuckles on the large black box that was nestled in it. Sleek and reflective despite the dust, it didn't seem to fit with the rest of the machinery. But then, who was I to say what did and didn't fit with such a high-tech contraption? The hairs on my arms suddenly stood up with the feeling that I was being watched. Something was sitting on the floor observing me from below the cockpit. The thing I saw was entirely new to me. It was yellow, for one thing. It was also flat, long, and had strange blue mushrooms growing along one side of it, making a fun pattern against the yellow part. It looked like a normal HOA-issued ankle sock, only much taller, like it went almost up to the knee. A knee sock? Was that a thing? It was kind of folded up on itself, but on the toe section there were dark smudges that looked very much like a face. "What are you?" I asked softly. And equally important, are your mushrooms edible? Meemaw would want to know. I picked up the sock and put my hand inside of it. It was a bit damp, I pulled it snug so the smudges that looked like a face were on top of my fingers, and the blue mushrooms were sprouting along the back. It looked like a little creature with an adorable little smile, almost like a little friend. I'd always wanted a friend. It smelled rather like a chamber pot, but I could let that slide for the sake of friendship. I moved my hand to make it look like my sock friend was talking while I spoke in an adorably high voice, because that was how a sock would sound. "Don't eat me," the sock said, "or soon my brethren will be eating you." I liked this sock already. It had spunk. It needed a name, though. What did one call a spunky sock that uttered a threat of vengeance with its first words? Beowulf? No. Nightblood? No. Batman? No. The answer came to me suddenly, like stomach cramps after trying a new type of cave mushroom that turned out to not be edible. Doomsock. Her name was Doomsock. Doomsock hung out on my hand while I investigated the black box in the storage compartment. My hand felt safe snuggled inside of her, so I decided to call that my safe hand. Doomsock smiled at me. I smiled back at her. To be honest, I wasn't sure if she was a she, since socks tend to be gender neutral, but it felt right. I ran my free hand over the top of the black box. So many buttons. I had no idea what to do with this thing. I noticed a cord coming out the back of it with 2 metal prongs on the end. They seemed to have a similar shape to the holes in the nearby wall. All my years of schooling were finally paying off. Hours and hours of matching the circle block to the circle hole and the triangle block to the triangle hole had prepared me for this moment. I owed it all to the HOA. I lifted the black box out of the storage compartment and set it on the ground near the wall holes. It was heavy. I grabbed the cord and shoved the metal prongs into the holes in the wall and waited. Nothing happened. This technology was beyond me. I looked closer at the black box and noticed that there were words written in English. The ship was human. How could that be? It must have crash-landed here long before we arrived on Gastritis. This was way more advanced than anything we had in the collective. I pressed the largest button on the top of the box that said on. The lights on the box sprang to life and a low humming tone started up, then sped up, warping until it became words. My ship was talking to me. "Hello?" I said to it. "Hello?" It was speaking in a language I couldn't make out. It sounded like mbop ba-dippy-dop, bop-doo-bop, ba-diddly-op, bop-doo-bop, ba-dippy-dop, bop-doo. Oh yeah. It had to be some ancient language a clan of humans spoke before I was born. The words were lost on me. I scratched my head. "What in the stars?" I asked Doomsock. Doomsock tilted her head to the side and said nothing. She was clearly as confused as I was. Doomsock and I went over to the storage compartment to see if there were any clues that might help to decipher the language. I found a smooth, square plastic case? I'm not sure what it was, but it had the name Hansen on it. Underneath the name it said Middle of Nowhere, which must be where Hansen was from. Hansen from the nowhere. That made perfect sense. There were pictures of 3 boys on the front of the case, which seemed odd. The kids looked about my age, and if I was being honest, the one with the ponytail was really cute and made my mind go places the HOA would not approve of. "They are probably all really old now," Doomsock reminded me in her sock voice. I know, Doomsock, but it's fun to imagine. Dang sock ruining my fun. We'd known each other for 5 seconds and she was already calling me out. It was the start to a beautiful friendship. I kept listening to the words my ship was speaking. Every now and then, I thought I could make out a question that sounded like, "Tell me?" But it soon reverted to the bop mumbo-jumbo. It seemed like it was introducing itself to me by telling me its name was Mbop, which was probably a nickname for Hansen, and then asking me to tell it my own name. "I am Spinster," I said to Mbop while pointing dramatically to myself to make my point clear. The ship was intelligent enough to speak, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to get information across in return. Maybe this was a flaw with artificial intelligence. It could only produce one-directional communication. There had to be some way to send a signal back. I sighed and sat down on a rock, feeling defeated. I doubted I would ever figure it out, not without help. This was probably the type of thing they taught us in the pilot program. Whales! I had made a terrible mistake. I glanced down at my wrist. It was only 4 freckles past a hair. There was still time. I could still make it back for the test. I had to try. I didn't care what they all said about me. I would show them all that Spinster Nightlight was the worthiest collective member in the history of the collective. No one could stop me now. I pulled Doomsock snugly over my arm, turned on my light line so it could show me the way back, and ran. Chapter 5. So, I failed the entrance test. I should have seen that coming. It turned out I hadn't memorized the Foresight pamphlets as well as I thought. It wasn't my fault that they were so boring. They were filled with all this stuff about purity and never questioning authority, and went on for pages and pages about how white the space whales were and blah, blah, blah. We get it. The whales were a very specific shade of white. Move on. Such a snooze fest. However, if the HOA thought that failing a silly test was going to stop me from being in the pilot program, then they didn't know Spinster Nightlight. Never give up. Never surrender. That was my motto that I had just made up. I would need to get creative. I pivoted to Plan B. It was a horrible plan. So I went to Plan C. That one turned out to be horrible too. I was quite skilled at coming up with horrible plans. Plan S had potential though. Plan S took advantage of the fact that the clans weren't allowed to talk to one another. Once I thought about it, I wagered that no one over in the basic clan even knew who I was. Tee-hee. I knew vaguely where the basic clan was from that time my dad took me to see the surface, so I searched the caverns until I found it. It honestly didn't take me that long, which was disappointing. I had hoped for a grand adventure. Unfortunately, I could smell the pumpkin spice lattes a mile away. The basic clan was known for those. A little ways away from the entrance, I peered out from behind Stealthy, which was what I named the rock I was hiding behind. The new pilot program cadets were all in a line waiting to enter the clan and officially become basic. There was only one kid from my clan chosen, and I didn't think he would rat me out. He was one of those delightfully smart introvert types who was paralyzed by conflict. His name was Rig, short for Righteously Serving the Collective, which was a mouthful, hence the nickname. The other cadets were all from other clans, so if I played it cool, I could totally convince them that I belonged. Most of them had a passing certificate with them to prove they passed the entrance test, but I noticed the cadets who were children of the prime cave dwellers didn't. Instead, they showed the guards something else to get in. What was it? I curled my fingers together into a circle and put it up to my eye in front of my glasses to get a better look. Looking through the finger tube, I could barely make it out. Wait, I knew exactly what those things were, because I had one in my jumpsuit pocket. Thank the whales above! I looked over at Doomsock. Now's my moment, I whispered excitedly to her. She raised the eyebrows she didn't have and shimmied her mushrooms in response. I felt encouraged. I confidently strode out from behind the rock and joined the end of the line. I put on my best, privileged prime cave dweller kid facial expression and pretended to be annoyed at how long the line was taking. When they finally got to me, I showed them my light line, and they let me pass without questions. Surely it wasn't that easy. I had to be missing something. I followed the group into what seemed to be a kind of lobby where an HOA board member was sipping a pumpkin spice latte and waiting to welcome us. "Welcome," she said, reading from a note card. "The banquet will begin shortly, but you all first need to be sorted into your houses. Those houses are Huffle—" Oh, wait, hold on. She put that card in her pocket and pulled out a different one to read instead. "Welcome. You will first take the ceremonial knife and slice your hand and let your blood drip into the bowl." No, that's not right either. She pulled out yet another card. "Welcome. Please proceed to the bowl and place your hand in the madra to test your—" No, still not it. She set her pumpkin spice latte down on a nearby rock and brought out a stack of cards and furiously shuffled through them. "Found it!" she exclaimed in an excited whisper. "Here we go. Welcome, new basic cadets. This is the basic clan where you are one step closer to being worthy of seeing the light of the surface and acquiring the vast knowledge of the universe stored in the minds of the space whales as a member of the superiority." She flipped that card over and continued. "There are bunk rooms for the girls to the left and bunk rooms for the boys to the right. Your name is on your assigned bunk. You'll find your meal vouchers, reusable Starbucks cup, and other allotted supplies waiting for you in your rooms." Whales, I had missed something. Assigned bunks. Starbucks cups. Meal vouchers. Where was I supposed to live? How was I supposed to drink pumpkin spice lattes? What was I supposed to eat? Spinster, you idiot. Doomsock looked at me with judgment in her eyes. She had clearly seen this coming. "Now run along and get settled in your bunks and grab dinner at the mess hall. Pilot program training starts tomorrow morning at 1 hair past a freckle. Don't be late." She stuffed the cards in her pocket and turned to leave, but then glanced back over her shoulder in a cheeky manner. "Oh, and by the way, you'll never see your old family and friends ever again, so hopefully you said goodbye." With that, she ran off into the bowels of the basic caves, mumbling quietly to herself. The boys immediately went off in the direction of the boys' bunks, and the girls started off towards the girls' bunks. I was left standing by myself in an empty cave lobby that smelled like pumpkin spice. Well, not entirely by myself. "This is not a total failure," I said to Doomsock. "As long as I can convince the girls that I am living in another bunk room, I should be able to go undetected." "Undetected?" she echoed back, mimicking my own voice surprisingly well. "Very good, Doomsock," I said. "Now the food matter is a bit more pressing. Are you sure your mushrooms are not edible?" "Not edible," she fluted back. Whales. That wasn't an option then. What was I going to do? I could have really used a pumpkin spice latte right then. My secret cave where I found my ship wasn't too far from here. I could walk back and forth each day pretty easily. There were plenty of rats down there as well. I bet I could sleep in the cockpit of my ship and live off rats for a while. It was the only plan I had, so I went with it. A few of the girls came back into the lobby on their way to the mess hall. They were all holding their new reusable Starbucks cups. I wasn't at all jealous. "You coming to dinner?" one of them asked me. No, I'm, on a juice cleanse," I said confidently. "Oh, okay. May the whales be with you." "And also with you?" That must be a greeting from their clan. Weird. I made my way back to my cave. My stomach growled. I hit a dead rat with my slingshot on my way, but then realized I wasn't sure how to cook it. I had never eaten a rat before. I always left them as gifts for Mother. She was going to miss my gifts now that I was a cadet and would never see her again. I decided rats were probably best eaten raw like an apple, so I sunk my teeth in and took a big bite. I made a mental note to take the fur off next time, but besides being on the fuzzy side, it wasn't completely horrible. It was messy though, so my jumpsuit got splattered a few times. Bloodstains would only make me look more intimidating, so I took that as a win. I climbed through the hole leading to my hidden cave and saw my magnificent ship leaning against the wall. I was slightly worried someone from the collective might have taken it. Surely they would want to analyze something so high-tech and use that information in our struggle against the Nell. But they'd have to get through me first. I struck an intimidating pose and snarled. "Grrr," Doomsock echoed back. She was getting so good at mimicking. The tin can poop smell of the cave reminded me that I had to pee. I didn't have a chamber pot out here. There was a brown river running through the cave. I figured I could also use it as a chamber pot if I did my business downstream from where I gathered water. That was going to have to do. I took off my jumpsuit, which was a huge flaw of jumpsuits if you ask me. You had to get basically nude to pee. A railing stood between me and the river, so I climbed over the top of it and put my feet on the bottom bar and braced my hands on the top bar. Holding on with Doomsock on my safe hand was challenging, but I made it work. I leaned my backside out a bit over the river so my urine wouldn't dribble into my shoes, which was largely successful. I climbed back over the railing, got situated in my jumpsuit again, and refastened my fanny pack. The whole day left me feeling incredibly resourceful and confident in my ability to live outside of the collective, all by myself. I was an independent woman, and I was exhausted. Luckily, I had my ship to sleep in. Climbing into the cockpit while the ship was leaning against the wall was a struggle, but I managed. I settled into the seat, put Doomsock in the metal storage compartment, and rested my arms on the handlebars. "Good night, Doomsock." "Good night, Mbop." Neither of them answered. I placed my head down on my arms and promptly fell asleep thinking about how I would wake up to my very first full day of being basic. I had finally made it. Chapter 6. I jolted awake feeling stiff. It was clear that sleeping in my ship was going to take some getting used to. I really needed a hot bath. I had never had one of those before, but I was pretty sure it was like a normal bath, only instead of siphoning off cold water from a leak in a cave wall to splash into your armpits, you siphoned off hot water. It sounded very relaxing. I had never been lucky enough to stumble upon a hot water leak. Maybe one day. I finished off the rat from the night before, grabbed Doomsock, made sure I had my light line to show to the basic guards so they'd let me back in, said goodbye to Mbop, and stomped proudly off to meet my destiny. I was so worried I would be late that I arrived in the training room 2 whole freckles early. There was only one other cadet there. He was sitting on one of 10 stools in the middle of the room. "Hi, what's your name?" I asked him. No response. "I'm Spinster," I said, and waved enthusiastically, thinking maybe he was a little shy. He took a sip of his pumpkin spice latte. "Do you not like to talk? I know quiet lips and all that, but you can whisper." Without moving his head, he looked up at me from where he was sitting and then went back to staring straight ahead and sipping his latte. What a malicious toad. I looked at the identification patch on his jumpsuit. Jurgen. At least I had a name for the toad now. I also noticed he had a light line in his pocket, so he was a privileged toad who didn't even have to pass the test. Even better. There I was sneaking into training, eating rats and peeing in a river while chefs brought him paper plates of canned green beans that were warmed up slightly. Such disgusting privilege. I hated him. I also loved that I hated him. I had always wanted a nemesis. My life suddenly felt like it had more purpose. This left me with conflicting feelings about Jurgen. I sat down on the stool that was farthest away from the toad and stared straight ahead. We both sat there consciously, not looking at each other and not speaking for what seemed like an eternity. It was excruciating. What made it worse was how amazing his pumpkin spice latte smelled. I was so fuming mad at him by the end of that eternity that I could have punched him in the face. It would have been his fault, too, for having such a privileged, punchable face. Finally, another cadet showed up. "Hey, guys," she said in a ridiculously loud voice. "Shh," I said. "Are you crazy? Why aren't you whispering?" "Oh, right, the whole quiet lips, no apocalypse thing, I forgot." "You forgot?" I scream-whispered at her. "How could you forget?" "Chill out, man, no harm, no foul." I had no idea what she meant by that. Her clan clearly spoke with a different dialect. I decided to let it go and move on to pleasantries. "What's your name?" "I'm FML." "Your name is just letters. Does it stand for something?" "It does, but you wouldn't understand." That was a weird answer. "In your clan, is it customary to give children names that are just letters?" I asked. "I have no idea. I wasn't born there." My eyes doubled in size. "What do you mean you weren't born there?" "My parents joined the collective when I was 8. I was born in upstate New York and went to public school before this." My eyes doubled in size again. Wait, what? What did upstate mean? What was a New York? Or a public school? There was clearly some kind of language barrier between her clan and mine. This made a lot of sense once I thought about it. The clans hadn't spoken to each other in 80 years. Of course we would use different terminology. My eyes, that were now 4 times their original size, turned to meet the gaze of another cadet who had just walked through the door. "Bless my stars, what big eyes you have," she said with a grin that took up most of her face in an unnatural way. "Hey, new girl, I'm FML. Who are you?" "I'm Kimmy, and you are talking in a volume that makes me uncomfortable. I am currently fearing for my safety and the safety of others." She smiled that creepy smile again. "Cool," said FML. Kimmy and I shared a knowing glance. She seemed just as confused by FML as I was. I think this meant we were going to be friends. Kimmy came and sat down next to me. "I'm Spinster," I whispered in a socially acceptable volume. "Nice to meet you, Spinster. May the whales guide us both on this new journey," she whispered back through that never-ceasing smile. In response, I held up Doomsock. "This is Doomsock," I whispered. I figured Doomsock was self-explanatory, so I left it at that. Kimmy's eyes got wide, and she didn't ask any questions, so she obviously understood. A few others came in and sat down, including Rig from back in my clan. He recognized me, but he didn't say anything about me failing the entrance test. I knew I could count on a quiet nerd not to rat me out. I loved quiet nerds. Not in a romantic way, but, just, like, in a general sort of fashion. A small boy with a little hat and a chronic cough stumbled in and introduced himself as Tim. Then 2 buff guys named Crab and Goyle came in and sat down on either side of Jurgen. They were obviously in cahoots with the Toad. 2 others came in and took their seats, but they seemed like very minor characters, so I didn't bother learning their names. That was the lot of us, all 10 new members of the pilot program. Jurgen suddenly stood up, went to the front of the room, and stared confidently down at us all. The 9 of us leaned in expecting him to say something. He didn't. He simply stared. He strategically made eye contact with each one of us in turn, in a weirdly authoritative manner. This went on for quite some time. No one dared say anything. He was clearly in charge and knew what he was doing. His staring routine was interrupted when an older man with a limp hobbled into the room holding a clipboard. He put off similar energy to the rat I ate for breakfast. "Cadets, I'm your new instructor. Name's Corn on the Cob, but you can call me Corn for short." He looked down at his clipboard. "Which one of you is Jurgen?" Jurgen raised his hand. "I should have known it'd be the strong, silent one staring everyone down before class started. You're flight leader. Get your crew lined up." Still not saying anything, Jurgen pointed to the side wall with an angry pointer finger. I never knew a finger could be that angry. His message was clear. We all went over to the wall and stood facing it with our noses slightly touching the cold stone. Jurgen huffed and came over and turned each of us around so that we faced out into the room, rolling his eyes the whole time. I was annoyed that he wasn't clearer with his directions to begin with. This guy clearly took the quiet lips thing way too seriously. Such a malicious toad thing to do. Korn pulled out a note card and read it out loud. Welcome, new basic cadets. This is the basic clan, where you are one step closer to being worthy of seeing the light of the surface and acquiring the vast knowledge of the universe stored. The welcome lady already read us that card, I blurted out. Do you always whisper back to your superiors, miss? He squinted to look at my identification badge. Nightlight? This training will be grueling, and not all of you will be sitting here by the end of it. Some of you will drop out, some of you will pull a muscle, some of you will suffer from lifelong back or knee issues. One, maybe two of you will survive to earn your wings and become a full pilot and serve the collective. I looked around and sized everyone up, trying to figure out who might make it through. Tim seemed iffy with that chronic cough. FML was weird, but she had spunk, so she might last. Kimmy was a wild card. Crab and Goyle were physically strong, but seemed about as smart as a rat. Rig was brilliant, but did he have the stamina? I didn't know. Obviously, the two nameless cadets would be out of here quickly, being minor characters and all. Gah, I really hoped it wouldn't be Jurgen and me at the end together. I hated him so much, him and his smug face full of pride. I could sense some prejudice as well. Korn continued. I remember when I earned my wings and became a full pilot. It was the proudest moment of my life. I wear my wings with pride. And indeed he did. Affixed to Korn's back via elastic straps that wrapped over his shoulders and under his armpits were the most beautiful wings I had ever seen. They were purple, with specks of blue and silver. They appeared to be made of a white metal coat hanger bent into wing shapes for structure, and covered in pantyhose that had been colored with markers. Truly an artistic masterpiece. They reminded me of the butterflies from old Earth that I had heard about. Some of you may one day too wear your wings with pride, but first you need to train to build leg strength and gain survival and decision-making skills. Korn adjusted his beautiful wings and looked us all in the eyes one at a time, like Jurgen had done. But Korn was less toady about it. Now, who can tell me the purpose of the pilot program? He asked. Rig raised his hand. You, what's your name? Rig, sir. The primary purpose of the pilot program is to have a strong first defense between the rest of the clans and the Nell. The basic clan is the closest clan to the surface, so this is quite literal. We've had other defenses in the past that have been less than ideal, so this new program is currently being evaluated for effectiveness, hence the name pilot program. The secondary purpose of the pilot program is to provide power for the collective, so we can have light in the darkness. We are only the 10th class of cadets, and so far the pilot program has been wildly successful and is under consideration for expansion. Somebody remind me never to call on that kid again. I took 2 entire naps while he was talking. Korn shook his head to wake himself up. Sorry, sir. You should be. Can someone else tell me how we protect the clans? Kimmy answered this time. By getting the entire collective to hide in the deep caverns during Nell attacks. Very good. As you are aware, our best defense against the Nell is hiding. If we can effectively get all the clans to hide when the Nell infiltrate the collective, then they won't know our true numbers, and we won't risk them sending a lifebuster bomb to wipe out our Spam and cottage cheese storage. This is our task, cadets, and doing this task well requires you to undergo extensive training so you can pedal fast, make quick decisions, and survive in any situation. Even pilots in training can be called in as reserves during an infiltration, so it is key to the collective survival that you take your training seriously from day one. When do we get to use weapons? Asked FML in a volume that made even Korn flinch. Never if you keep talking that loudly. You'll lead the Nell right to us, cadet.
Sorry, sir, whispered FML in a way that still felt too loud. Korn turned slightly so we could all admire his wings again before continuing his speech.
The highest level of technology we have in the collective is reserved for cadet training. This technology has been crafted specifically to give you the skills you need to be an integral force in our struggle against the Nell. Follow me. It's time.
Chapter 7. Korn stood up and led us down the hall to another room. I watched his wings bob up and down as I followed him. He pulled back the sheet draped over the entrance to reveal the simulation chamber. My eyes once again became 4 times their original size. There were 5 ships lined up on the back wall. They weren't nearly as advanced as Mbop as I had suspected. They didn't have storage compartments or colorful strips of fabric hanging off of the handlebars, and their gears were much simpler. They also didn't have AI, which was the true thing that set Mbop apart. A ship that could talk. I still couldn't quite believe it. Each of these lesser ships stood on platforms. Their front wheels were secured in some sort of locking mechanisms, and cords trailed off from the back wheels and disappeared into metal contraptions that sat on the floor. Next to each ship were what I assumed to be these simulation chambers. Each one had a little chair attached to a little desk, and on the desk was a high-tech square apparatus with a curved, gray screen and a flat attachment that held letters and numbers. There was also a little thing that looked like a smooth rock on a string off to the side. The high-tech apparatus was also connected by cords to the strange metal contraption on the floor.
Welcome to the simulation room, Korn whispered. From now on, you will work together in wing-mate pairs. One of you will pedal the practice ship while the other works in the adjoining mock pit. The ships provide the power for the mock pit, so this is your first lesson in supporting your wingmate at all costs. You slack up, they can't train. When you hear ding-ding from Jurgen's ship bell, then you will switch places. Got it?
Yes, Korn, sir, we whispered in unison.
Good. These first few weeks, the mock pit simulations will focus entirely on survival skills.
We don't get to shoot stuff? Asked FML.
Of course not, you fool. First you survive, then you fight. You lot have never even seen the surface. You have no idea what's out there. Snakes, quicksand, poison ivy, the plague.
No, we all gasped.
Yes, you were all wildly unprepared.
Korn took a deep breath, adjusted his wings, and calmed himself before continuing.
The technology in your mock pit is advanced, so you may have trouble distinguishing between the simulation and real life at first. That is normal. Go ahead and take your positions on your flight leader's signal.
We heard the ding-ding from Jurgen's bell and got situated on the practice ships and the mock pits. FML was with Rig. Crab and Goyle were together. Tim was with Jurgen. The 2 nameless collective members were paired, and I was with Kimmy. She started out on the practice ship and I climbed into the mock pit. She put on her helmet, knee pads, and elbow pads, and I put on a contraption that had a firm band across the top of my head and 2 bagel-like lumps that snuggled my ears real tight. I did not yet know their purpose, but I was ready.
Flight leader, have your crew sign off with their call signs,
Korn Whisper yelled. I knew all about call signs. I had decided what mine would be years ago. Jurgen started us off. Jürgen, call sign Gefahrzeichen. Was that a sneeze? Could a call sign be a noise?
Jurgen, your call sign cannot be a sneeze. It must be an actual word, scolded Korn.
His call sign should be toad, I suggested as a semi-joke. Crab and Goyle snickered at that, which made me proud.
Keep going or this is going to take all day, Korn whispered in an annoyed fashion.
Crab, call sign Goyle.
Goyle, call sign Crab.
That seemed potentially problematic. Kimmy, call sign, I can't think of anything. That was a ridiculously long call sign, but I respected it. FML,
call sign T Swift. Rig, call sign R Zone. Tim, call sign Tiny Tim.
Tiny Tim, are you sure about that, man? Asked Goyle.
What? I'm small, my name is Tim, it's accurate, and Tim was interrupted by a coughing fit, so we kept going. The two nameless cadets said their unremarkable call signs, and then it was my turn. Spinster, call sign Spin. Spin. It was brilliant, so different from my normal everyday name. I felt like a whole new person and was ready to take on anyone and anything that came at me. Those of you in the practice ships, start pedaling. This will power up your wingmate's mock pit. Do not stop pedaling until you hear the ding-ding from Jurgen. Is that understood? Yes, Korn, sir, we whispered. The 5 cadets in the practice ships pushed their cave-dirtied sneakers into the plastic pedals on their ships. The back wheels turned slowly. The front wheels remained stationary in their locking mechanisms. As they picked up speed, I could feel energy radiating off their ships. I wondered what it would be like to actually ride these things, to take off the locks and pedal as fast as I could. I would soar. If I could somehow fix MMMBop, I wondered if I would be able to do just that. I bet MMMBop could go faster than these dinky things. I started daydreaming about fixing up MMMBop and riding him all by myself and feeling the air glide across my face as my sneakers pounded the pedals as I went faster and faster and... Spin. Your mock pit. Activate it. Korn fussed. Whales. Everyone else had already gotten started. I could feel the motions of Kimmy's legs churning beside me. I pushed power and my mock pit came to life. The gray surface in front of me burst with color. I heard a tone like a gong echo in my ear bagels, and before my eyes there appeared colored boxes and the words Windows 95. Beyond that, there was a bright blue light. It was obviously simulating what it would be like to see the sky. I was mesmerized. Such pure, radiant light that was off limits to me until the space whales deemed me worthy. I reached out my hand reverently to touch it. Spin, this is not a touch screen, Whisper yelled Korn. Sorry, sir. I withdrew my hand. I'd have to wait until he wasn't looking up to try again. Hurry up, Spin. The others are already beginning their journey. Yes, sir. I looked at my screen. It had turned to black now and displayed the words Oregon Trail, followed by my first survival skill test, which read, You can 1. Travel the trail. 2. Study the trail. 3. Look at a map of the trail. 4. Turn the sound off. Make your decision. This was going to be harder than I thought. What was my choice? My gut told me to go with number 1. My gut might be full of rat meat, but I trusted it. I looked down at the sea of letters, symbols, and numbers and found the number 1. I hit it. Another test popped up. My goodness. Lots of people traveled to Oregon. You can 1. Be a banker from North Carolina. 2. Be an influencer from Ohio. 3. Be a house flipper from Illinois. 4. Explore viable career choices. Make your decision. I had absolutely no idea what most of those words meant. Influencer didn't even sound like a real job. I looked around the room at the other 4 cadets in their mock pits. I whispered to Kimmy, How does everyone else know what to do? This doesn't make any sense. The others have logged hundreds of mock pit hours prior to this, Spin. They are the children of the prime cave dwellers. Wait, so are you. You have a light line just like them. Haven't you logged hours as well? Whales. I walked myself right into that one. No, mock pits are forbidden in my clan. They're weird about stuff like that. Well, bless your stars. Kimmy was starting to sweat from pedaling. I needed to speed this up so I didn't let her down. I had to support my wingmate at all costs. I went with influencer from Ohio. I felt good about that decision. Choose a name for your wagon leader. Name? Any name? I put Doomsock. That was probably a mistake. I had no idea. I started to stress sweat as I made a bunch of other rash decisions.
I spent $800 at Matt's general store. I didn't know what a dollar was, but I knew I didn't have any left. I did, however, have 2 wagon tongues. Whatever those were. The simulation demanded choice after choice after choice, and I panicked that I didn't make the right ones. How did I know which one was correct? Sweat dripped down my face around my ear bagels, and my legs shook with anxiety. I attempted to trade and was informed that no one wanted to trade with me that day. I shouldn't be here. I have no idea what I'm doing, I thought. These were the type of decisions I would have to make in real life if I made it to the surface. I clearly wasn't cut out to be a pilot. I had to travel 100 miles to the Kansas River crossing. If I could just make it to that river, maybe I could survive. I watched my oxen pull the wagon across a bright green field and arrive at a glistening blue river. The simulation was as real as Corn had let on. I was entranced by the detail of it all and had completely forgotten about the room around me. I could almost smell the water. I was asked if I wanted to stop to rest, but that seemed like a lily-livered chicken heart's move. And I was no lily-livered chicken heart. I continued on the trail. I was then faced with the most challenging test thus far. You must cross the river to continue. The river is 361 feet across and 294 feet deep in the center. You can 1. Ford the river. 2. Float to the other side. 3. Enjoy a leisurely ferry ride across. 4. Hunker down and wait for conditions to improve. 5. Gather more details. Make your decision. I chose what I thought was the least chicken-hearted answer. I forded the river. Did I know what that meant? No. No, I did not. But the rat gut never lies. Corn peered over my shoulder. Great job, spinster. Your entire wagon party just drowned while fording a dangerous river. Everyone, listen up. I don't care what the HOA says about chicken-heartedness. If the river looks dangerous, you wait to see if conditions will improve. Do you understand, cadets? There was rage in Corn's whisper. But, Corn, if we don't ford the river, we won't prove our worth to the space whales, argued Tiny Tim. Do you think the space whales want you dead or alive, Tim? Alive? Yes, alive. You cannot, I repeat, you cannot inherit the vast knowledge of the universe from the space whales if you are dead. So don't ford the dang river without exploring other options and assessing the situation. What do I do if my oxen run out of water? Goyle, that's such a rookie mistake. You chose to leave at the beginning of summer, didn't you, idiot? Crab shook his head while he continued to pedal. He was drenched in sweat. Corn pressed his fingers to his temple and sighed. You reckless children, this training is not a game. Your decisions are important. You must think things through. Review the map, look around, talk to people, slow your pace, stop to rest if necessary. You are plunging ahead with no regard for safety or survival. You'll never make it up on the surface. I was ashamed that I had died so quickly during my very first attempt in the mock pit. I had thought I would be a natural at this. I'd assumed my dad's skills would pass directly down to me. They did not. Stomping around the caves was one thing, but making quick life-or-death decisions and being responsible for others was something I was not prepared for. What it meant to be a pilot had suddenly gotten real. Ding, ding. That was Jurgen's bell. It was time to switch places. Maybe Kimmy would have better luck than I did. I traded her my ear bagels for the helmet, knee pads, and elbow pads, which were now quite sweaty. As I strapped on my right elbow pad, I looked over to see Rig climb off his ship and lean against the wall. His face was green. Rig, are you okay? I asked. I got no response. Rig? R-Zone? He took off his helmet and puked on the floor. Corn walked over to him. Rig slowly took off his knee pads and elbow pads and handed them to Corn. Corn nodded to him and Rig walked toward the door. Wait, Rig! I was so confused. Rig looked back over his shoulder at me and whispered, I wasn't made for this, spinster. I have asthma and 0 leg strength. This wasn't my dream, but I'm glad it's yours. With that, he pulled back the sheet that covered the entrance, and walked away. "There's always one on the first day," whispered Korn. "Pedaling a ship is hard work, and not everyone is cut out for it." I thought back to when Korn told us that only one or two of us would make it through to earn our wings. Now I had a lot more context as to why that was. Rig had given up so easily, though. "Lily-livered chicken heart," I called him in my mind. After all that work to get here, how could he just up and leave? Chapter 8. The empty ship where Rig used to pedal was a void that I wasn't ready for the next morning. One of the minor character cadets had also quit after the first day for unknown reasons, leaving us with a convenient even number for wingmate pairs. I had already grown accustomed to Kimmy's unnervingly cheerful presence after one day, so I didn't like the idea of having a different wingmate if she were to leave. The idea of potentially being Jurgen's wingmate made me nauseated. Or perhaps that was the rat I ate for breakfast. Living off dead rats had seemed like a noble sacrifice I could easily stomach in order to fulfill my dreams. But after 5 consecutive meals of just rat, I began to wonder if I was missing out on some key nutrients. The second day of training was even more grueling than the first. I only made it to Oregon once. Meanwhile, Jurgen completed the journey every single time and only got dysentery twice. What a toad. I didn't know how he did it. However, what I lacked in survival skills, I made up in speed. That morning, Korn asked me to slow down on several occasions because my pedaling was causing Kimmy's mock pit to overheat. I know that wasn't necessarily a good thing, but I had to admit that I was proud. Jurgen never pedaled fast enough to overheat a mock pit. Apparently, all my years of exploring had left me with the strongest legs in the collective. We broke for lunch, but of course I couldn't eat in the mess hall without vouchers. "Spinster, where are you going?" Kimmy had noticed me sneaking off. I'm still on my juice cleanse," I muttered as I headed off to my cave. "You really gotta be careful with those juice cleanses, Spin," FML said too loudly. "Doing them for too long can be dangerous." "How do you know that?" I asked. "I read it on a blog," she answered. Kimmy and I shared glances. "What's a blog?" we both whispered at the same time. "Oh, it's this thing on the internet that's kind of like a book, except no one can stop you from publishing it." That left me with more questions than I started with. I was hungry, so it wasn't time to get into a discussion of dialect differences. So I just smiled and held up Doomsock. "Why do you wear that weird mushroom sock on your arm? No judgment, just curious," FML asked with eyes full of judgment. "It's Doomsock," I answered. Kimmy looked at FML and shook her head subtly. "Ah, Doomsock, that explains it," FML responded. After that, we all stared at each other in an awkward silence for a while. I felt so privileged to finally have people to share an awkward silence with. Kimmy broke it off with, "Well, see you after lunch, Spin," as she and FML headed off to the mess hall. I smelled canned tuna wafting down the hallways, which was my cue to go find the leftover rat I had stashed behind a rock. It didn't take long to eat it, so I devoted the rest of my lunch hour to Mbop. I had no idea what it would take to get him running again. No matter how many times I tried to make him stand up, he always fell back against the wall. Whales. I didn't have the technological know-how to figure this out, but I knew who did, and I doubted he had anything better to do now that he dropped out of the pilot program. I busted out my light line and led myself back to my home clan. A while later, I stood outside Rig's bedroom, throwing pebbles at the blanket hanging across the entrance. They each hit the fabric with a dull thud and slowly cascaded down to the ground to gather in a little pile. I must have thrown 40 or 50 of them until I finally got his attention. I was so focused on throwing pebbles at that point that I didn't notice him walking out, and I accidentally hit him on the nose. "Ow," Rig whispered. "Spinster, what in the whales are you doing?" "I'm getting your attention, obviously." "I can see that, but why?" "Come on, I have something to show you."
If you're here to fuss at me for leaving the pilot program, I'm not interested. Unless you have some of Mima's mushroom wraps. Then, maybe. It has nothing to do with you leaving. Come on. You're gonna want to see this. He let out a sigh and rubbed his nose where the pebble hit him. He bruised so easily. I promise you won't regret this. Doubtful, but at least let me pee first. No need. You can pee in the river. River? Spin, what in the whales? Where are we going? This better not have anything to do with rats. I wanted to build suspense and intrigue like the HOA did, so I didn't give him a direct answer. Instead, I took out my light line and started leading us both back to my cave. The journey seemed so much longer with Rig muttering, "I really have to pee," and asking, "Are we there yet?" repeatedly. We eventually had to stop so he could pee behind a rock. He said there was no way he would make it to the river. His loss. He'd never understand how freeing it was. We climbed through the hole leading to my secret cave, and Doomsock and I eagerly watched Rig's face for signs of shock and wonder. We were not disappointed. First, Rig's pupils dilated. Then his bushy brown caterpillar-like eyebrows crept to the top of his forehead. Finally, his mouth popped open like a can of beans that had gone bad. "I promised you wouldn't regret it," I said with a stupid grin. "What do you think?" In response, Rig mumbled something about prose not doing it justice, and wrote a haiku with his finger in the dirt on the floor while he wept. Shiny, sleek silver, leaning magnificently, a ship of dreams. I know, so bad. It didn't even have 5 syllables in the last line. I lied and said I liked it because it seemed personal to him, and he was already weeping. Most poetry is bad anyway, so this one fit right in. Chapter 9. I didn't get much sleep that night after I returned from training. Every time I dozed off, I would wake up to Rig talking to Mbop. He was going through the same routine I went through at the start, trying to get Mbop to respond. It was no use. Rig would eventually figure it out. "My name is Rig," he said over and over, daring to speak above a whisper in hopes Mbop would hear. All he got in response was the usual nonsense language. Around 4 freckles past a hair, I rubbed my eyes and sat up, giving up on sleep. Rig lay below the ship, fiddling with the pedals. I flopped down next to him, yawning. "So?" I asked. "It's incredible," he whispered. "Have you told Korn about it?" "Not yet." "Why, wait! This thing could help in our struggle against the Nell. Rig, you know I'm not supposed to be in the pilot program, yes?" "Yeah, I know, you failed the entrance test." "Exactly. And they are going to figure that out at some point and kick me out. They are never going to let me earn my wings and become a full pilot. If I keep Mbop to myself, then I can still be a pilot when that happens. I will still have a chance of impressing the space whales." "Spinster, there are so many ways to serve the collective and impress the space whales." "True, but being a pilot is associated with childhood trauma of mine, so I am fixated on it to the point where no one can change my mind." "That's fair. So, do you want to help me fix this thing?" Rig's face lit up. "Well, I do have a very convenient 2 months of sabbatical after leaving the pilot program, during which I am free to do whatever I want with no questions asked, as I decide what I want to do with my life." "Is that a yes?" "Yes." "Excellent. Excellent," echoed Doomsock. "Gah," Rig started. "That sock is so unsettling. I always forget it's there, and then it appears out of nowhere." "That's the beauty of Doomsock." "Yeah, beauty. That's the word for it." "I need to get to class. Are you going to head back to the Ignoramus clan?" "Nah, they won't miss me. I can head down later. I want to look at Mbop's storage compartment first." "Great," I said. "If you're still here when I get back from class each day, I'll join you with the repairs. If not, leave me notes telling me what I can do to help." I hesitated. "Remember, I'm not very tech-savvy, so leave me the easy things, please."
Rig smiled at me and looked at Mbop. It was crazy, but this plan to fix him might just work. I walked away as Mbop droned on in the background with the usual Mbop ba-dippy-dop bop-doo-bop. I still didn't know what it meant, but I had to admit it was catchy. Before I climbed out of the cave, I turned back to Rig and whispered, "Keep it secret. Keep it safe." I didn't want him to get any ideas about telling the collective about my ship. That day, Korn started us on debris fall training. Apparently during heavy Nell attacks, chunks of rock could fall from the ceiling. I had experienced this the day I found Mbop, and it was terrifying. I paid extra close attention. You never want to be caught off guard by debris falls, cadets. Well, if you want to remain three-dimensional, that is. The training you are going to undertake today will train your brain to make quick decisions and navigate amidst the debris. Flight leader, sound off and get the training started. Jürgen, call sign Gefahrzeichen. What did he say? Asked Crab. I think he said toad, snickered Goyle. I smiled. Jürgen growled, which shut them up. Crab, call sign Goyle. Goyle, call sign Crab. Kimmy, call sign, I can't think of anything. FML, call sign T-Swift. Tim, call sign Tiny Tim. The minor character who was left said their call sign, and then it was my turn. Spinster. Call sign Spin. It felt strange with only 8 of us to sound off. We'd lost 2 too many already. There was no time to dwell, though, because Kimmy had started pedaling and my mock pit lit up. I saw the sky appear again behind Windows 95. Then ominous yet motivating sounds started playing in my ear bagels as the word Tetris appeared on the screen in blocky letters. Before I could get my bearings, box-shaped debris started falling from the ceiling of the simulated cavern. Korn had explained that the goal was to control the debris fall so it fit together on the cavern floor and didn't fill up to the top and block off the whole chamber. My first piece of debris was a square, so I just let it fall in the middle somewhere. Then another piece of debris fell. It looked like it would fit over the box like a little hat, so I moved it over on top and let it fall. It seemed easy enough. Then another piece fell that looked like a walking stick, so I stuck that one over by the cavern wall. I kept going and going until the debris at the bottom fit snugly together and magically disappeared and made more room in the cavern. Debris fell. I found the perfect place for it. More debris fell, and more, and more. The music urged me on in the background. I would never stop. I could never stop. I could do this for hours on end. The entire collective melted away, and it was just me and the debris. Ding, ding. No, not ding, ding. I didn't want to switch places. I wanted to keep doing Tetris training. Looks like Spin got the high score this round, whispered Korn. I wanted to scream with pride so loudly that the whales would hear, but instead I whispered, "Suck it, Toad," under my breath as I peeled myself out of the mock pit. As I pedaled and powered the mock pit for Kimmy, I watched her navigate the debris. She was horrible. She put the pieces in such nonsensical places. It was almost like she was trying to fail. I'm not going to lie, I was a tad embarrassed to be her wingmate. I whispered that to Doomsock. At Jürgen's next bell, Korn walked around to each mock pit and announced, "Looks like Spin still has the high score after that round, too. Nice work, cadet." I glared at Jürgen, who glanced away at my fierce gaze. Doomsock nodded at me in approval. "When are we going to actually do something useful and fire weapons?" groaned FML, who did not seem to be enjoying debris training at all. "I just want to blow something up already." "Cadet, this is not a game. You are not ready to train on weapons yet. You've barely made it to Oregon alive, and only 2 of you can successfully keep a cavern from filling up with debris." I looked over at Jürgen. I knew in my heart of hearts that he was the other one who had done it. "Such a toad," I whispered to Doomsock. "Toad," Doomsock whispered back. "But we have to know how to defend ourselves," complained Crab. "Yeah," added Goyle. And the last group of cadets said they'd already started weapons training by now. I don't care about last year's cadets. They can go blow themselves up and leave the collective unprotected and without power. And then everyone will depend on you lot who actually know how to survive. Everyone in the room sank down dejectedly when it was clear we wouldn't be learning about weapons anytime soon. Everyone except me. I wouldn't mind if we spent the next year on debris fall training. But, Korn continued, perhaps a change of pace might be good to keep you on your toes. Everyone up. Follow me. Chapter 10. Korn led us down a series of twisted walkways until we reached an enormous open cavern. Near the entrance to the cavern were dozens of ships lined up and waiting. These were not practice ships. They looked identical to the practice ships, only they weren't locked into the ground, and they also had 2 extra tiny wheels sticking out from the larger back wheel. I wondered what those were for. All right, Korn whispered. Each of you needs to select a training ship. You may notice they have extra wheels. These are so you don't fall over. You'll be grateful you have them, so I don't want to hear any complaints. No one said a word. We were flabbergasted that we were going to get to pedal real ships, so we didn't want to say something stupid and cause Korn to change his mind. Line up and sound off. The 8 of us scrambled to grab a ship and formed some semblance of a line facing out into the cavern. We sounded off in a hurry, and no one made any snide comments for once. Not even me. Ready, sir, confirmed Jurgen. Here are the rules, Korn explained. Each cone you pedal around gives you 1 point. We looked out into the cave. There were 5 orange cones set up at varying distances from us. Some were near the wall or a rock, while others were more out in the open. Once you begin a run, you must maintain a speed of at least gear 1, and you can't circle around if you miss a cone. There are 5 cones, and let you each do 3 runs through the course. Highest score gets 2 desserts tonight, but a warning. If you crash into a wall or rock or fall off your ship, your score is frozen where it was and you cannot continue. I perked up and tried not to get too depressed that I couldn't have a second dessert no matter what because I wasn't even allowed a first. A game? FML asked. Like, you are actually going to let us have fun? I can have fun, Korn said. I know all about having fun. Most of it involves sitting and dreaming of the sky after eating a mushroom wrap that this old lady makes back in my home clan. Now, stop asking me stupid questions and go! I climbed on my ship as fast as I could after making sure my helmet was secure. Crab was already headed towards the first cone at a fearsome speed of at least gear 2. His ship wobbled back and forth dramatically but didn't tip over due to the extra tiny wheels protruding from the back. I understood why they were there now. I pedaled my own ship and found it unnervingly difficult. The sense of security I felt in the practice ship was completely gone. Gripping the handlebars for dear life as my ship teetered back and forth, I inched forward towards the first cone, gaining a smidge of stability as I picked up speed. The situation was still precarious. I thanked the whales for the tiny wheels. Kimmy, Goyle, Tim, and the nameless cadet were right on my tail, inching towards me one wobbly pedal after another. Tim didn't even make it to the first cone before running into the wall. He was the first one out of the game, which was probably best because he collapsed into a coughing fit right after that. I expected FML to be last, but she flew ahead of all of us. It was like she had done this before. The cadet who was last was Jurgen, who hadn't even started pedaling. He had delayed for some reason. I focused on the course, racing from cone to cone. The third cone was right behind a big rock, so it would be next to impossible to pedal around it without crashing. FML let out a holler and executed a near-perfect hook turn right around that cone and continued to the next one. Her tiny extra wheels floated across the ground as if she didn't even need them. Her shouts of excitement echoed in the cavern and made me shiver with fear. She was so loud. I made the tactical decision to skip the third cone, which proved wise because Goyle attempted to turn around it and only crashed right into the rock. He was out of the game with only 2 points. I made it around the 4th cone with no problems, but I missed the 5th one. Luckily, I didn't crash, but I also didn't get the point. I ended that run with just 3 points, but I knew I could do better the next time. Just then, Kimmy crashed into the wall after losing control halfway around the 5th cone. Not even the tiny wheels could save her. She was out. It was just me, FML, Crab, the nameless minor character, and... I looked back and Jurgen had just started his first run. He had been scouting the course, I realized. Clever boy. He got 4 cones just like FML. I am such a fool, I thought. It isn't a race. It's a test of precision. I slowed my ship down to Gear 1 for the second run, just as FML, who had zoomed ahead, lost control trying to speed around the trickster 3rd cone and crashed into the wall. "Ha!" she exclaimed. She didn't seem to care that she'd lost. She just seemed happy there was a game to play now. I took a deep breath and focused on what Korn had taught me. Support your wingmate at all costs. Don't ford a dangerous river. Don't pedal too fast and overheat the mock pit. Organize the Tetris debris into neat rows. I wasn't sure how any of it applied to this situation, but it did have a calming effect. I pedaled around the first 2 cones without issue. I approached the 3rd cone at a speed that was slow enough to control but not too slow to the point where my ship wobbled significantly. I struggled with left turns, so I went in for a right turn and smoothly made it all the way around and continued to the 4th cone. "Nice one, Spin," Whisper yelled Kimmy. The nameless cadet crashed into a rock at the very start of the second run. I was relieved by this because if they had won, I might have had to learn their name. Crab finished out strong with 4 more points. He and I had both avoided the 5th cone that was giving everyone grief. Once again, Jurgen waited until everyone else was through the course to begin his run. I gritted my teeth. Doomsock gritted hers, and we focused on the contest. I had to beat Jurgen. It was a matter of honor. He finished his second run with 4 points again. That put him at 8 points and me at 7. I didn't know how many points Crab had, but it didn't matter as long as I beat the Toad. The 3 of us pedaled back to the start to begin our final run. Once again, Jurgen stayed back and waited for us to go first. Fine, I thought. I increased my speed to Gear 1 and headed to the first cone. I knew I had to get every one of these to beat him. Crab strangely zoomed past all the cones without even trying to pedal around them. "What are you doing?" Korn asked. "I figured with everyone crashing left and right I could probably win with no points at all," Crab explained. "That's not how the game works," said FML too loudly as she rolled her eyes. I gripped the handlebars with all my strength and started sweating as I approached Cone 3. I had done this one before. I could do it again. Come on, Spinster. I could feel Doomsock sending me encouraging vibes. I appreciated this, especially since Doomsock was forced to chew on the handlebars any time I got on a ship, which had to be a weird experience for her. I pedaled confidently towards the third cone, but I waited too long to turn and shot right past it without going around. Whales! I managed not to crash into anything at least. Jurgen was still waiting to start his run, watching to see exactly how many cones he'd need to win. Whales! I hated that boy. I was so distracted thinking about how much I hated Jurgen that I missed the fourth cone entirely. It was one of the easy ones. I was so mad that I managed to perfectly pedal around the fifth cone, which no one else had managed to do. That left me with 10 points. Jurgen already had 8. Whales! He could close that gap so easily. I glared at Jurgen. Who did he think he was, just lurking back there waiting for the rest of us to fail? He was so prideful. But the worst part of it was that he had been right to wait. He'd been smarter than I had, and he was going to win because of it. Unless a wonderful, terrible, no good, very bad idea came into my head. I looked at Doomsock with a mischievous grin. She looked back at me with an expression that said, I don't know what you're thinking, but I'm in. I accelerated to gear 2 and raced back to the start of the course where Jurgen had just gotten going on his final run. He was pedaling leisurely at exactly the minimum speed. "Spinster, what are you doing?" whispered Kimmy. I ignored her. I hopped off my ship and raced towards Jurgen's as fast as my legs could carry me, which was pretty dang fast considering how strong my legs were. He had it coming, I thought as I reached out and grabbed the back of Jurgen's seat with both my safe hand and my free hand. He didn't notice at first, but as I ran behind his ship and pushed it firmly towards the wall, he looked back frantically. "Varum?" he whispered to me, which obviously wasn't a word. I grinned and then forced his ship to smash into the wall. He tumbled to the ground and groaned. "What in the Wales was that?" the Toad Whisper yelled at me as he stood up. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking how to win," I exclaimed proudly. "We're on the same team, Spinster. Do you have a defect or something?" He was furious. "What does that even mean?" I responded in annoyance. "There is, I believe, in every disposition a tendency to some particular evil, a natural defect, which not even the best education can overcome." "Well, your defect is a propensity to hate everybody," I snarled as I thought about how fancy he had sounded just then. "And yours," Jurgen replied, "is willfully to misunderstand them." "Enough, Jurgen," Korn called out. The Toad fell silent. "You both failed." "I still won," I said. Korn stared at me. I shrugged. "You set the rules. 10 points for me, 9 for the Toad. It's not my fault he doesn't get to try for the last few points." "It is absolutely your fault," whispered the Toad as loud as he dared. "I guess we shouldn't expect real honor from the daughter of a lily-livered chicken heart." My blood ran cold. Who told him? "What?" FML walked towards us as she asked. "You know, call sign Chase Lounge, the famous lily-livered chicken heart." Jurgen spoke to the rest of the room while staring directly into my eyes. "That's her father. She lives in a remote cave and eats rats as well. Did you all know that?" "I said enough," Korn Whisper shouted. "Class dismissed. Everyone out, now." His beautiful wings fluttered as he ushered everyone else out of the cave. I shouldn't have felt embarrassed. I'd lived my whole life getting looks and hearing whispers behind my back in my home clan. I was used to it. It was just that it had felt nice to be able to make my own way without living in that shadow, the shadow of a lily-livered chicken heart. The rest of the cadets had left, so it was just me and Korn. He looked at me with a grim expression that seemed to say, "I know who you are, and I know you aren't supposed to be here, but I'm not going to tell anyone because I believe in you despite what everyone else might think about your father, because the HOA isn't telling you the full story of what happened to him, so don't let the others get to you, because you can't give in, not now, not ever." Either that or he had something in his eye. Encouraged by his support, I held my head high as I wandered back to my cave. Chapter 11. Rig had already left by the time I woke up the next morning. He'd done a ton of work on the ship during the night. I was impressed. I wasn't sure exactly what he had done, but there were a bunch of tools strewn about, so great things must have happened. He left a note to update me. "Hi, Spinster. I made a lot of progress last night, as you can probably tell from all of the tools strewn about. The kickstand is completely fixed, so you no longer need to lean Mbop against the wall. And I adjusted the height of the seat for your specifications. Also, I was brave and started exploring the box that holds the AI, and I made an amazing discovery. All I will say is, I open at the close." Open at the close? What was that supposed to mean? I checked the back of the note, but that's all there was. If he was going to bother to write something down, he could have made his meaning a little clearer. I sat down on the floor next to the black box and searched through all the buttons. There was power, volume, play, pause, stop, tune, and aha! There it was. Open. It was right next to a button that said close. That had to be it. I pushed it.
A square section of the black box slid outward towards me, revealing a secret inner chamber. Inside of that chamber was a red and silver disc with a hole in the middle of it. It said Hansen, and middle of nowhere, just like the identification case. Wow! Rig had found the essence of the AI. I reached my free hand in and slid the disc out of the secret chamber. I felt like a mighty space whale holding the AI in the palm of my hand. I noticed there were smudges on the back of it, where I had touched it with my fingertips, so I breathed condensation on the surface with a few warm breaths and wiped it on my jumpsuit to clean it off. It was good as new. As I stared at the disc, it dawned on me that it was about the same size as the identification case. Perhaps the case wasn't just for identification after all. I grabbed the case and inspected it. It was hollow, a feature I had missed previously, and the top popped open when I pulled on it. I was a genius. As I suspected, there was an indentation inside the case that was the perfect size to hold the disc. This wasn't an identification case, it was a transportation case, so you could transport AI to somewhere. I had no idea where. I decided to take Mbop's AI essence with me to class to investigate. I put him in the transportation case and secured it in my fanny pack. When it was my turn in the mock pit that day, I examined the technology for anything resembling the open button I had found on the black box. Well, that Rig had found and told me about. But he wasn't there, so I could take full credit. I looked at every single letter and number and symbol and was about to give up hope when I glanced up and saw the word open on a small rectangular button below the screen. I pushed it and held my breath. Out slid a flat horizontal surface with a similar circular indentation. A less technical person than myself might have mistaken the horizontal surface for a place to rest a cup. But I knew its true purpose. It was a secret AI chamber. I let my breath out. I slyly slid Mbop's disc out of my fanny pack and placed it in the chamber. The transportation case was back in my fanny pack before anyone noticed anything amiss. I was stealthy like that. Moments later, I heard Mbop's energetic voice in my ear bagels. "Shh, Mbop, not so loud," I whispered before remembering that no one else could hear him. He could drone on as much as he wanted during training, and no one else would have a clue. Wild. I had successfully transferred an AI from an advanced ship into a mock pit. I was officially the most technologically advanced person in the entire collective. No question. Doomsock patted me on the back and we settled in to start training. I thought it might make it hard to train with Mbop chattering away the entire time, but strangely, I found it much easier to focus. Mbop also helped me to keep my mind off of Jurgen, who glanced over at me every now and then. I refused to give him the satisfaction of glancing back, not after he outed me to the other cadets. We started Pac-Man drills that day, which were intense. They involved running from the ghosts of our enemies while gobbling up tiny pebbles. Korn said it would improve our rapid decision-making and navigation skills. I did okay at first, but every round the ghosts got faster and faster, and it became quite overwhelming. I died over and over again. If I didn't have Mbop there with me to encourage me and keep me distracted, I might have given up. "Korn," I asked, "do the Nell gang up on individuals like this in real life?" The ghosts were clearly coordinating. "Nell motives are unknowable," he responded as he adjusted his wings and walked away, signaling the end of our conversation. Ding ding, the toad's dang bell. I quickly put Mbop back in his transportation case while Kimmy was removing her helmet. I couldn't risk anyone, not even Kimmy, seeing the advanced technology I had. I would not risk exposing Mbop and having him taken away from me. I climbed into the practice ship and began pedaling. I missed having Mbop talking to me while I trained. I wondered if there was a way to wear ear bagels under my helmet, but I didn't see how they would fit. Oh well. I kept a steady pace, trying not to overheat the mock pit again. Without Mbop to distract me, I noticed that Tim was coughing more than usual. He was trying to pedal, but every now and then he had to stop to hack up stuff.
It was rather unpleasant to listen to. Jurgen looked stressed by the situation, which made me happy. I hadn't figured out how I would enact true vengeance on Jurgen yet, but I knew it would involve rats. I kept pedaling, trying to mind my own business. This worked for a bit, but the coughing got harder to ignore. We had had zero training on what to do when someone coughed up red stuff. Tiny Tim must have had canned beets for breakfast or something. "Tiny Tim, you need to stop pedaling. It's not safe," Crab urged. "Can't stop. Won't stop," whispered Tiny Tim between coughs. "Stand down, cadet," barked Corn. "I can't let the collective down. I won't be a lily-livered chicken heart." Tiny Tim's voice was barely audible. "Tiny Tim, follow orders. Dismount your practice ship for your own safety." Jurgen's face looked panicked as he said that. I didn't know his eyebrows went that high. "No," Tiny Tim whispered as he gasped for air. "I'm not a lily-livered chicken heart. I can do the..." The final word was swallowed up by a coughing fit from which Tiny Tim never recovered. We watched as his face turned red, then blue, then purple, then back to blue, and then to quite a lovely shade of teal, and finally to white. His little legs kept pedaling even after his body drooped forward over the handlebars and went stiff. None of us knew what to do. Not even Corn, who kept nervously adjusting his beautiful wings. I thought perhaps it would be wise to poke Tim to make sure he was dead, so I did. I immediately regretted it. My poke had just enough force to shift his weight and make him fall sideways off his ship and land in a crumpled heap on the floor. His head hit the ground quite hard, but fortunately, he was wearing a helmet. His wide corpse eyes stared up at us. Brave till the end, that one. We all came to a silent consensus that training was done for the day, so we slowly exited the room one by one, leaving Corn to deal with things. Chapter 12. The day after Tiny Tim died, I arrived late for Corn's class. It was my first time being late. Everything just felt wrong. I vaguely remembered leading myself back to my cave with my light line. Rig had already left, and I still had Mbop in his transportation case, so it had been eerily quiet. Then I just sat there on my ship, not sleeping, but wishing that I could. My eyes started tearing up, but I was afraid that crying might be considered chicken-hearted, so I decided that if I didn't blink, then the tears didn't count. I found I could keep my eyes open for a really long time. I added it to the mental list I kept of my useful skills. That morning, nobody called me out on my tardiness, not even the toad. Corn wasn't there yet, so he was obviously running slow as well. I futzed with my fanny pack as I walked by the ship Tiny Tim had been pedaling when he died. The room felt so much quieter without his cough. Jurgen stood up and faced the rest of us with a somber expression. He began to speak in a gentle tone, even softer than a whisper. "I am sure we shall none of us forget poor Tiny Tim, shall we, or this first parting that there was among us. And I know that when we recollect how patient and how mild he was, although he was little, we shall not quarrel easily among ourselves, and forget poor Tiny Tim in doing it." He's reading, I realized, from notes written on his hand? Jurgen continued, now holding his hand up before his eyes. "If you need counseling at this loss or for any other reason, as your flight leader, I am here. Please come to me so I can make you feel better. Thank you." He sat down. And well, I suppose he tried. The last part was nice, but the first bit was phrased awkwardly. It was the most I had ever heard Jurgen say at one time, so perhaps he always sounded like that. Corn finally limped through the door holding a fistful of loose wires and muttering something to himself. "Helmets on, get in position," he snapped. "We're going to cover Pac-Man maneuvering today. Again, your technique is so sloppy, it's unacceptable." We just kind of stared at him. "Move," he whispered fiercely. Everyone started strapping in. I reached for my ear bagels. Then, instead, I stood up. "Is that it?" I demanded. "Aren't you going to say anything about Tiny Tim?"
He paused for a moment. Perhaps I should say something here about loss. Something wise. Sometimes I don't feel like a teacher. I feel like a battery changer. I stuff you into the chamber, make you pedal as fast as you can, see you struggle as you bring power to the collective. Then I watch you burn out and die. Metaphorically, of course. And then I reach for another youthful battery and start the same thing all over again. Only in this case, Tiny Tim really did die. He didn't just sprain his ankle, or hurt his back, or get explosive diarrhea. He died. He hung his head. We all looked at him, looking so sad, and didn't know what to do. A few silent moments passed as we shifted our eyes to one another, hoping someone else would do something. Set your sights on something more grand, I said finally. Corn looked up. Huh? When I was a little girl, my dad told me to set my sights on something more grand. He was wrong, of course. He was supposed to say grander, and I've always wondered why he didn't. He was a smart man. He should have known that. So I think perhaps he was trying to teach me a lesson, to tell me that life sometimes doesn't turn out like you think it should, or that all the grammar I've ever been taught is wrong. Either way, losing Tiny Tim was unexpected, and it hurts. It wasn't the way things were supposed to go. I felt chicken-hearted tears forming, so I looked over at Doomsock, who always made me smile. She wiggled her mushrooms and gave me the strength to keep going. I knew so little about Tiny Tim, I continued. I knew he coughed a lot and that he was small, but I also know now that he refused to give up. He pedaled up until his very last moment, for the collective. So that's what we should all do now, in Tiny Tim's honor. Tiny Tim can't inherit the vast knowledge stored in the minds of the space whales, but we can. The others went still, ushering in an uncertain silence, like the moment between one sneeze and the next. Then Kimmy gave me an enthusiastic thumbs up. Doomsock nodded approvingly. The toad stared at me with an inscrutable frown on his face. Whales! There was no winning with that guy. All right, Corn whispered, standing up. Let's train. Flight leader, get everyone strapped in and sound off. For Tiny Tim. We got in our positions and Jurgen gave us the official ding-ding. Jurgen, call sign Toad. I smiled. Crab, call sign Goyle. Goyle, call sign Crab. Kimmy, call sign, I can't think of anything. FML, call sign T Swift. The boring minor character sounded off, and then it was my turn. My turn came so quickly now that there were only 7 of us left. Spinster, call sign Spin. Corn worked us hard that day. We drilled Pac-Man until my fingers felt stiff, and we pedaled until my legs were jelly. He even worked us through lunch and had sandwiches delivered instead of everyone going to the mess hall. Nothing was delivered for me, of course, but I stole half of Jurgen's when he wasn't looking. It was the best thing I had ever eaten. Spam and cottage cheese on a bagel. I could have eaten 50 more. The training day was so grueling that I didn't have any time to think about Tiny Tim. Corn ran us through drill after drill after drill. I still never gobbled up all the pebbles before being annihilated by the ghosts of my enemy. Jurgen seems to have a gift for this type of training, as did FML, who got a new high score every time she went through the maze. She was incredible. In more ways than just Pac-Man. Most of us wore the standard-issued jumpsuits, but not her. Alongside her jumpsuit and fanny pack, she wore polished boots, bracelets, necklaces, and a ring that changed colors throughout the day. I had no idea why or how. She almost seemed more like a statue than a person. I didn't realize I had been staring at her with my mouth wide open when she looked my way. We had just ended training for the day and everyone was packing up and going to dinner. But she walked over beside me and leaned on my ship. "Thank you," she said too loudly as always, "for what you said earlier about Tiny Tim. Most of what you say is windy bravado made as an excuse to tout cultish mantras instilled in you by a lifetime of collective indoctrination. But what you said about Tiny Tim was from the heart. So thank you. I don't hear much of that down here." "You're a weird girl, FML," I said. I had no idea what most of what she'd said had meant. I shook my head at Doomsock in confusion. Weird girl, Doomsock tooted back and then glanced at me as if to say, "You, of all people, are calling someone weird?" The sock had a point. I walked with FML into the hallway right outside the training room. The rest of the pilots had already made their way to the mess hall. "I just want to make it clear," she said still too loudly, "that I don't blame you for your beliefs. You're a product of brainwashing since infancy. You didn't stand a chance, but I see on the inside that you are sweet." "I'm actually kind of salty," I argued, as I licked my arm to confirm. "Yeah, definitely salty." With that, FML rolled her eyes and walked away. I was about to head back to my cave when I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I looked back into the training room and noticed Jurgen was still there. He was putting on his helmet and getting back on his ship. "What?" He started pedaling slowly. He didn't look around, he just pedaled in the saddest way I had ever seen. I walked back into the room. "Jurgen, what are you doing?" I whispered. He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. One tear escaped and trickled down his cheek. I always thought it would make me happy to see the toad cry. It didn't. It seemed losing Tiny Tim had taken a toll on him. Tim had been his wingmate, after all. I didn't really want to go back to my cave because that meant it was time to eat more rats, so I figured I could keep Jurgen company while he pedaled because, weirdly, it made me sad to see him so down. Not that I cared about him or anything, of course. He was still a malicious toad. I strapped on my knee pads, elbow pads, and helmet, and climbed onto the ship next to him. He kept glancing over at me. I tried to glance back at him to see what he was doing without him noticing, but we kept accidentally locking eyes. It got awkward real fast. I heard him sneeze whisper something that sounded like, "Das Leben ist so kurz," as he suddenly ripped off his helmet and climbed off his ship. He walked over in front of me and put his hand on my handlebars. "Spinster, in vain I have struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you." "What?" Chapter 13. Jurgen's Interlude. Jurgen sat by himself in the mess hall and nibbled on a rice cake. He wished so desperately to be able to join the others, to laugh, to whisper, to bond. Even if in the end he had to deal with the pain of losing a friend, at least he would have known what it was like to have one. He had Crab and Goyle, yes, but they were more like bodyguards than true friends, since he wasn't allowed to talk to them. Mother and father said that was the way it had to be, the only way to protect their family's secret. He used to agree with them. He never pushed back or argued against it. He was a rule follower after all. You took orders from your superiors and didn't ask questions. Any other option was pure chaos. They had to protect the family secret at all costs. But meeting Spinster had changed everything. The costs suddenly felt like too much. He realized for the first time in his life that doing what mother and father ordered meant he would always be alone. He would never experience friendship or love. True, mother and father loved him, but not in the way that made him feel funny in his heart and in the lower half of his jumpsuit. That was the type of love he felt for Spinster. She may not love him back, he knew that, but he would never even get the chance to find out. Mother and father had each other to go through life with, but he would never have a partner. Ever. They were risking far less to preserve the secret than he was. He was giving up his whole life. He didn't understand why the family secret was such a big deal. He'd never thought to question it before. Had it really taken a girl who ate rats and talked to a yellow sock to get him to think for himself? Apparently it had. What would happen if the others knew their secret anyway? He took a moment to logically think through the consequences. Mother would lose her seat as HOA board president for certain. She wouldn't be trusted after that. Father would also probably lose his job doing whatever it was father did. He went to some type of room and sat in a chair. Jurgen knew that much. Could he really betray them simply for the chance that Spinster loved him back? Nein, das kann ich nicht, whispered Jürgen quietly to himself. If the others knew that his family only spoke German, his life would be ruined. His parents would disown him, and then he'd truly be alone. Obviously, Jürgen had picked up some English during his life. He had been around English speakers since birth, so he had learned phrases from around the collective. For instance, he knew by heart a lovely nursery rhyme the other kids ran around chanting when he was little. We live underground in a collective, in a collective. A collective's not a cult I say. We await instructions from the whales. Until then, we cannot see the light of day. There were little clapping patterns that went along with the chant, but you needed a partner to do those. He sometimes did them by himself in the mirror, pretending his reflection was his friend. But it wasn't the same. He was not exactly sure what the rhyme meant, but it had always filled him with a positive feeling, and he liked that. Jürgen also had access to one book he had found that had been monumental for his language learning. It was about pride, as well as prejudice. He learned quickly as a child to never use English around his parents. He accidentally said good night in English once, and he was given the scolding of a lifetime. Looking back, he didn't know what they were so afraid of. If he could learn English and then teach them, wouldn't that solve all their problems? His parents clearly didn't see it the same way. The family's secret would die with Jürgen. No one would ever know that they had put a German woman in charge of the HOA who didn't understand a word of what was being discussed. It wasn't all her fault, Jürgen knew that. She had a strong, silent-type vibe, and people gravitated towards those types of people for leadership. The HOA had promoted her, given her family their own cave, and respected the fact that she was a woman of few words. She was the master of quiet lips. If she only contributed grunts and nods to their HOA meetings, then that was all right with them. She had won re-election every year because no one dared to run against her. She had somehow been promoted to HOA board president along the way, though the details of how that happened were fuzzy. It seemed to be going okay. She hit the little gavel thing at the start of the meeting, like the last leader had, motioned to the person to her right, who read something off of a piece of paper, and then she nodded or shook her head at various points in the meeting, when the time seemed right. The only stressful moments came when the entire HOA went quiet and looked to her for some type of response. She gave herself 5 options in this case. 1. Nod once in a subtle yet powerful way. 2. Roll her eyes. 3. Point to a random person on the HOA, and not stop pointing until they started speaking. 4. Put her face in her hands and not look up until the meeting had adjourned. 5. Stand up decidedly and walk out of the room. She tried to use number 5 sparingly so it didn't lose its effect. She made herself a little spinner numbered 1 through 5, and before each meeting she would spin the wheel to see which tactic she would use should the need arise. It hadn't failed her yet. No one had learned the truth to this day, and she was counting on the secret dying with Jürgen. Jürgen never thought he would betray his parents, but that changed when Tiny Tim died. That evening at dinner, Jürgen had briefly choked on a solitary green bean. He coughed repeatedly in an attempt to dislodge it. He coughed just like Tiny Tim had coughed. He realized that his life could be taken away as swiftly as Tim's was. That scared him. He vowed that he would not die without confessing his love for Spinster. He had to give love a chance, no matter the consequences. And when Spinster came back into the training room and started pedaling beside him, it gave him hope that she might love him back. Chapter 14. Spinster, in vain I have struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. What? In declaring myself thus, I am fully aware that I will be going expressly against the wishes of my family, and I hardly need add my own better judgment. Your situation with the cave and the sock and the rats is such that any alliance between us
must be regarded as a highly reprehensible connection. Indeed, as a rational man, I cannot but regard it as such myself. But it cannot be helped. Almost from the earliest moments of our acquaintance, I have come to feel for you a passionate admiration and regard which, despite my struggles, has overcome every rational objection, and I beg you, most fervently, to relieve my suffering and consent to be my girlfriend." "Your girlfriend?" I stared at him with wide eyes. He stared back at me as if waiting for something. "And this is all the reply I am to expect?" he asked. "I mean, I don't know, Jurgen. You basically just told me you liked me against your will, and you insulted Doomsock in my cave. You've been a toad since the first day I met you. You and your quiet lips and your staring at people to intimidate them, and reading things you've written on your hand as if no one will notice. Can you deny that you have done all those things?" "I have no wish to deny it. I do write lines on my hand that I have studied, and the staring is a technique I learned from my mother. She finds it highly effective for leadership. As for Doomsock and the rats in the cave, do you expect me to rejoice in the inferiority of your situation? To congratulate myself on the hope of a girlfriend whose condition in life is so decidedly below my own?" "You suck, Jurgen. I wouldn't want to be your girlfriend if the only other option was a rat." "You have said quite enough. I perfectly comprehend your feelings and now have only to be ashamed of what my own have been. Please forgive me for having taken up your time and accept my best wishes for your health and happiness." With that, Jurgen turned and stomped out of the training room, letting the sheet flap back down angrily over the entrance behind him. I listened until the sound of his footsteps faded into silence. I released the death grip I had on my handlebars and realized I had been holding my breath. How dare he? How dare he confess his love for me? What in the whales? I pedaled slowly as I tried to process what had just happened. I pedaled long into the night, but I couldn't figure it out. Jurgen hated me. Everything he did and said had led me to believe that. The only explanation was that hate and love were not as different as I thought. I peeled off my sweaty helmet and climbed down from my ship. As I made my way back to my cave, Jurgen's words echoed in my mind. "Your situation with the cave and the sock and the rats is such that any alliance between us must be regarded as a highly reprehensible connection. Did you expect me to rejoice in the inferiority of your situation?" I looked over at Doomsock. "Don't you worry, Doomsock. Nothing about you is highly reprehensible. You are the best friend I have ever had." "Best friend," Doomsock mimicked back. "That's right, best friends forever." I gave Doomsock a hug. That immediately made me feel better. Who cared what Jurgen thought when I had a sock best friend? I got back to my cave and fell asleep almost immediately. Chapter 15. Weeks had passed since Tiny Tim's death and Jurgen's confession of love. Those two events would always be strangely linked in my mind. Working with Rig off hours to repair MMBop had been a welcome solace, even if it was taxing to get up early, work on the ship, then deal with Korn all day. Today we were removing each of the colorful strips of fabric that hung from the handlebars and replacing them with new ones. The old ones seemed satisfactory to me, but Rig thought they played an important role in aerodynamics, and that they should be updated. I wasn't going to argue with his expertise. I grabbed another ribbon and attached it according to the instructions Rig had drawn for me in the dirt on the floor. He was in the back of the ship working on the storage compartment. He grunted as he worked, and Doomsock helpfully imitated him. Rig pulled out his notebook to make some notations. "That black box is the only thing I don't recognize at all on this ship. It obviously houses MMBop's artificial intelligence. I don't dare try to break it apart and try to fix it, although it is obviously malfunctioning." "What makes you think that?" "He can't hear us, for one. We should be able to communicate back and forth like in real life. His ears are broken, or whatever he uses for ears are." "A valid point." "What I am most interested in," Rig continued, are his gears. It's hard to explain, but they all feel tighter, more finely constructed than what we're using. And their structure is far more complex. It makes me think that this ship can travel at many speeds. Spinster, I think if we do get this thing working, it's going to be fast. That gave me a shiver to imagine. Rig put away his notebook and started doing something fancy with a wrench. I watched him for a moment. He seemed happy. Happier than he had ever seemed in the pilot program. Where did you get all these ribbons anyway? I asked. Did you steal them? No theft required, he said. The leader supervising my internship in wardrobe gave me an entire bundle of fabric to practice my sewing skills with. I figured, what better way to practice than to make replacement ribbons for the ship? Nice. So the internship is going well. Well, I drew some sketches of the ribbons on ship handlebars, and the instructor saw them and assumed they were my own designs. She might think I'm a genius. You are. Not really. Whoever designed MMMBop is a genius. Those things can both be true. Whales! MMMBop is repeating the loop again. MMMBop had been droning on while we worked. He was very talkative, probably because he hadn't had anyone to talk to for years. Too bad we couldn't talk back. He kept repeating the same things after a while, which got annoying. I wish I knew how to fix him. Surely no one designed him like this on purpose, just repeating things on a loop. How long until we're able to take MMMBop for a test ride, do you think? We're actually close to being done. I just need to air up the tires, oil the gears, and I need to make some custom tech for the pedals. Custom tech? At the speeds that this ship can go, I'm afraid it may be hard to keep your feet on the pedals, so I'm going to make some straps to help you. You really are a genius. Rig blushed and kept working. It's a freckle past a hair. Don't you need to get to class? He asked. He was right. I tied my last ribbon, grabbed some rat for breakfast, slipped MMMBop's AI into the transportation case and into my fanny pack, and headed off. I was dreading seeing Jurgen. It had been awkward between us ever since the event. He looked nervous whenever I was near. I couldn't remember seeing him look nervous before. He seemed almost shy. It was weird. All right, cadets, Korn whispered. Ask the whales for blessings because I think you lot might just be ready to learn some advanced weapons techniques. Real weapons? Real combat? FML looked like she could squeal with glee. Simulated weapons, cadet. I wouldn't trust this group in a pillow fight. We'd been training so long on other skills that I'd almost forgotten we were supposed to learn about weapons. I was both nervous and excited. Doomsock looked at me with a leery expression. So we're gonna practice bombing things like the Nell do? Asked Crab. It doesn't take a brain to use a bomb, Crab. You drop it, end of story. Not much practice needed. The NES Zapper, though, that's another matter. Practicing with this is the perfect stepping stone to eventually wielding a slingshot once you earn your wings. The NES Zapper can shoot any simulated target within 5 feet. That's a very close range, whispered Kimmy. Ridiculously close range, Korn said. You'll have to practically smell the target before you can zap them. Our mock pits weren't powerful enough for the NES Zapper simulation, so we all had to take turns in a specifically outfitted mock pit. Spinster, you first. I swallowed and walked over to the new mock pit nervously. I didn't like the idea of everyone staring at me during my turn, but I also didn't want them to know that I was scared. So I held my head high. I held it a little bit too high because I could no longer see where I was walking, so I lowered it a bit. Korn handed me the NES Zapper. It was gray and smooth to the touch with the word Nintendo written on it in orange. It fit nicely in my hands, though Doomsock made it a little hard to grip. Whales, no. Spinster, you have to hold it the other way around. Korn put his face in his palms and shook his head slowly. I turned the Zapper around so the long tube part with the hole on the end pointed toward the mock pit screen. It honestly felt better the other way, but whatever. Now put your pointer finger over the orange trigger and wait for the ducks, Korn instructed. The ducks? I asked. Yes, you are going to practice shooting ducks.
Are Nell similar to ducks? Sure. Get ready, here they come. I squinted one eye and held the zapper straight out in front of me while I waited for the ducks to appear. So far, I only saw bright green things coming out of the ground that reminded me of Oregon Trail survival training. There, a black and white duck flapped across the sky. I pointed the zapper and squeezed the trigger. I missed. Another duck zoomed across the screen. I aimed, I fired. I missed again. Whales! This was humiliating. To make things worse, a creature with floppy ears popped up in the simulation and laughed at me. I could tell this simulation was designed to test mental fortitude, as well as weapons technique. I made it through my entire turn without hitting a single duck. I was a failure. I passed the NES zapper to Goyle and shuffled to the back of the group with my head hung low. I needed something to cheer me up, so I snuck over to my mock pit and slipped Mbop's AI into the secret chamber and put on my ear bagels. Even though I couldn't talk back, hearing Mbop's voice made me smile. I also smiled at the fact that Goyle didn't hit any ducks either. At least I wasn't the only failure in the group. Turns out we were all rubbish at zapping ducks. We missed by what seemed like miles. The only person who hadn't gone yet was Kimmy, and we had only hit 2 ducks between the lot of us. And yes, one of those ducks was hit by Jurgen. I'm sure he would gloat about it later. Still, for how close they were, he had to be embarrassed he didn't hit more, like I was. All right, Kimmy, go ahead. Show 'em how it's done. If you insist, sir, whispered Kimmy. I took off my ear bagels and walked over to get a better look. She held the zapper in front of her with steady hands and fired a focused zap towards the first duck. She blasted it out of the simulated sky. She then repeated the feat again and again and again. Everyone's jaw was on the floor apart from Korn, who stood there with a smile on his face. It's kind of like trying to hit the floor with a rock, Kimmy said with a quirky grin. The ducks are barely moving. How? I asked in awe. How did you learn to duck hunt like that? There were bats in the cavern I grew up in. My dad put me on slingshot duty once my hands were large enough to hold one. I never killed them, just stunned them a bit so I could relocate them to a different cave so ours wouldn't fill up with bat poo. Huh. You think you know a person. By the time we broke for the day, I had managed to hit 2 ducks. One of them was on accident, but no one needed to know that. I had been adjusting Doomsock and happened to squeeze the trigger at the right moment. Jurgen, on the other hand, improved with every round. Watching him hit ducks that I had missed should have made my blood boil, but I found I couldn't muster up the anger like I used to. I still planned to kick his ship over and laugh maniacally the next time we were doing cone drills. I walked out of the training room to go back to my cave and found Jurgen standing in the hall waiting. Spinster, he began nervously. The way you shot the ducks, it was... Like a lily-livered chicken heart, I taunted. Jurgen hesitated. I'm sorry I said that, Spinster. I know what it's like to live in the shadow of a parent. I never should have told the others that. I promise never to do it again. You promise never to out me to the others again? Yes. That's impossible, Jurgen. What do you mean? Everyone already knows. You can't tell them again. Oh, that's true. Well, I promise not to remind them if they forget. Okay. He put an arm out, asking for a hug. I wasn't sure how to respond to that, so I shuffled closer to him and leaned into his arm. He hesitantly rested his arm over my shoulders. I looped one arm around his back. I guess we were doing this. Spinster? Yeah? Why are you hugging me? What? Why are you hugging me? I'm not. Yes, you are. You came in close and I didn't know what to do. You were the one who put an arm out for a hug. What? We quickly untangled ourselves from the embrace and jumped back from each other. Jurgen nodded to me and walked away in a hurry. I was a mess of conflicting emotions. I walked down the hall on my way back to the cave. The conflicting emotions weighed down on me. All my life, I simply wanted to get into the pilot program so I would be worthy in the eyes of the space whales. It all seemed so simple. Then Jurgen came along, and made me feel things. First he was my nemesis, and now I had no idea. I raised my safe hand to eye level and stared into Doomsock's beady eyes. At least I wasn't alone. "Spinster," something whispered my name. "Doomsock, was that you?" I glanced down at her. She didn't say anything else. "Psst, Spinster," the voice came again. I looked around the room and didn't see anyone, so it had to be Doomsock. "Doomsock, what do you want?" I asked. "It's not the sock, you weirdo, it's me." I looked towards the hallway where Kimmy was hiding behind a boulder and waving at me enthusiastically. I walked towards her. "What are you—" "Shh," she said, then sunk down until her stomach was on the ground and started to crawl down the hall, pulling herself along awkwardly with her arms. She looked back at me, urging me to follow. Both Doomsock and I were confused, but we followed her. She crawled on her stomach, and we walked behind her at a leisurely pace. This continued for a couple of turns through empty corridors. Then we hid in the bathroom for a few minutes for no discernible reason before continuing. She refused to explain what this was all about, and, as someone who valued intrigue, I respected that. I also realized I could have been using this bathroom all along to shower and stuff. Oh well. We finally reached a hallway with a bunch of doors covered in pink sheets, the girls' bunk rooms. Kimmy motioned for me to hide behind a rock. I did, but I raised Doomsock up above the rock so she could see what was happening. Two unfamiliar women stood outside one of the rooms chatting. They looked a few years older than us, and they wore the beautiful wings of full pilots. One of them had delicate light blue wings with silver sparkles, and the other had bright orange wings with red swirls. Someday I would earn wings of my own. After the two girls left, FML's head popped out of one of the doors. Even her head pops were loud. Kimmy scurried along the floor as fast as she could towards FML, and I followed, ducking into the room. FML loudly shut the sheet over the entrance and grinned at me. I looked around their bunk room. They each had a plain green cot and a standard-issue navy blanket and pillow. There was an extra bunk that no one seemed to be using. Maybe one of those minor characters who left had been a girl. There was also a big pile of blankets on the floor. I nosed trays of food on top of the dresser, cans of cold soup and thick rice cakes. Real rice cakes. My mouth started watering. "We told the mess hall leaders we were sick so they'd send our food to the room, and we asked for extra," whispered Kimmy excitedly. "We had superfluous blankets, so we figured you could sleep on the floor. Jurgen mentioned you like to sleep in a remote cave, so the free bed is probably too comfortable for you." Wales. I was going to cry. They'd pretended to be sick so they could order food and share it. With me. They'd even made me a little blanket bed on the floor. I fought back my tears. "Oh no, you look angry. We can take the blankets back. You can sleep on the cold rock floor if you want. You might like that better." Kimmy started folding one of the blankets that was on the floor. "It would be a nice break from the cave, right, Spin?" added FML. I nodded. Doomsock nodded. Neither one of us trusted ourselves to speak. "Great, let's eat," said Kimmy with a stupid grin. I had forgotten what anything other than rat tasted like. The soup's flavor was like happiness. It glowed inside of me like a fully charged cave lantern. I snuggled in the floor blankets and spooned the soup into my mouth directly from the can, while Kimmy and FML chatted away. "I told you no one would see me if I crawled," Kimmy bragged. Yes, you did. You're lucky no one spotted you. Collective members are all too eager to tell on others for breaking rules." "Why do you always talk like you're not a collective member, FML? You're one of us." FML grinned in a mischievous way. "Being in the collective is a mindset, Kimmy, so I never joined." "Why wouldn't you want to join?" Kimmy asked. "I refuse to be trapped by bonds of cult leadership in this underground pit. After my 18th birthday, I'm out. My parents can't legally stop me from escaping to the surface then." What was a birthday? Must be another clan term I didn't know. "But where will you live? How will you survive?" Kimmy's voice was full of genuine concern.
I'm gonna live with my IRL bestie in New Jersey. It's not New York, but it's better than this brainwashed hellhole. Plus she has a hot tub and a whippet." I didn't understand any of that, so I simply said, "May the whales be with you." FML laughed loudly in that way that was somewhere between ha 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 and wah ha 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 as she shoved a rice cake in her mouth. I didn't understand why she was laughing. Only fools climbed to the surface before the space whales deemed them worthy enough to see the light. She was as good as dead, but at least she wasn't a lily-livered chicken heart. Brave till the end. I slurped the final spoonful of my soup while I processed what she had said. "Wow, Spin, you really liked the soup." "Is this seriously what you get to eat every day?" I asked, afraid of the answer. "Of course. What do you eat?" asked Kimmy. "Rats," I said, "and sometimes mushrooms if I can find the kinds that don't give you diarrhea or kill you." They shared a horrified look. "Bless your stars," whispered Kimmy. "You've made some very interesting life choices, Spinster," said FML. "So, what do you guys do all night after training?" I asked. "Oh, you know, girl stuff," whispered Kimmy with a smile. Why did that sound ominous? "What's girl stuff?" I asked. "Like braiding hair, having pillow fights, making friendship bracelets, that sort of thing." Kimmy held up her wrist to show me her bracelets. One said, "Anti-hero," another said, "Speak now," and the last one I could read said, "Fearless." I liked the last one best. "What do they mean?" "I'm not sure," answered Kimmy. "FML comes up with all the ideas." "I'm a bit of a bracelet genius," FML stated matter-of-factly. I had to agree with her. "And that's all you do? Every evening?" "FML also taught us pickleball, but it works better with a ball that bounces, so it's pretty hard to play with rocks." "Anything else we could do?" I asked. "We could always stay up all night and talk." "Talk about what?" I was scared the answer would be girl stuff again. "We could discuss your non-consensual indoctrination by a soulless system designed only to spit out willing, cultish, obedient thralls," suggested FML. "Or there's always hide-and-go-seek," added Kimmy. Hide-and-go-seek sounded more up my alley. I knew both how to hide and how to seek. "You're it, Kimmy," shouted FML. "No, every time," groaned Kimmy. "Okay," began FML. "The rules are, stay in Basic Clan, don't get caught by the HOA. The person who is it must recite the first chapter of Foresight Book 13 before going to find the others. Whoever is found first is it next." I was glad I wasn't it because I had no memory of Foresight Book 13. "We also have the added danger of Spinster not being allowed here in the first place, so extra consequences if she gets caught." "I live for danger," I whisper-yelled as I struck an intimidating pose. I didn't actually live for danger, but sometimes if your dad is branded a lily-livered chicken heart, you overcompensate. "Okay, Kimmy, start." Kimmy began reciting something about old Earth being destroyed because humans were too aggressive, and then the almighty space whales granted mercy on those who left the planet to settle on gastritis, but they refused to ever share their vast knowledge of the universe freely again, and left a series of tests for us so we could prove we were worthy and not like the citizens of old Earth. Seemed logical to me. I then remembered we were playing a game and scurried off to find a place to hide. I wandered past the mess hall and saw Jurgen there munching on rice cakes. He looked sad and lonely. I hated seeing Jurgen as a human being with feelings. Things were so much simpler when he was my nemesis. Perhaps I shouldn't have been so mean to him. I felt a bit guilty about making everyone call him a toad, but he was being a toad. Why did he have to go apologize for outing me and say all that stuff about living in the shadow of a parent? I felt so weird towards him now. I felt something like empathy? Ugh. I thought about going up to him and apologizing for the toad thing, but luckily I wasn't allowed in the mess hall without a voucher, so I had a good excuse not to. Plus, I was on a time crunch to find a hiding spot. I had no idea how long it took to recite Book 13. I passed some excellent rocks that I considered hiding behind, but that seemed too cliché. I needed to hide somewhere unusual so Kimmy would never find me. Walking around the caverns at night, just me and Doomsock, felt like the good old days. I led myself with my light line and thought of my dad and my old pal Lobotomy. I wandered for a good amount of time but wasn't able to find a spot that seemed worthy enough as a hiding place. I was pretty sure I was still in the Basic Clan, though I had no context for where it started and ended. It's not like there were signs or anything. Suddenly I came around a bend and saw a door. An actual door. Chapter 16. I turned the knob and opened the door to the mysterious room. We had few true doors in the caverns since they required wood to build, which was hard to come by. Most rooms had either a sheet or a blanket as a door. There were a few entrances that had doors made of strings or beads that hung down and clacked around behind you once you entered. Those were my favorite kind of doors, but only the HOA board members were allowed to have them. This true door made this the perfect hiding place. I snuck inside the room and closed the door behind me. I was used to darkness, but this was dark. I shuffled my feet slowly into the room, trying not to run into anything. I shuffled in vain because after I traveled a few inches, a thin chain that was hanging from the ceiling hit me in the face. I grabbed it and pulled it out of my way. Right as I did that, a bright, glowing orb appeared above me. The light was unlike any I had seen before. Instead of the soft yellow of the cavern lanterns, it was fiercely white, almost blue. It felt otherworldly, resplendent, incandescent. I couldn't quite find the word to describe it. I was so mesmerized by this light burst that I stared at it for far too long. Even when I peeled my eyes away, all I could see was the bright white light in the middle of my vision. After a few minutes, my eyes slowly started to adjust, and I could make out some of my surroundings. There was a lot to take in. The room was both small and vast. There were shelves and shelves of items to explore. It was overwhelming. I was so lucky to have Doomsock with me to anchor me to reality. There was a slow trickle of water running down the wall between two of the shelves, which provided lovely waterfall ambient noises while I explored. On one side of the room were a number of expertly stacked blue buckets with a wooden stick as tall as me leaning up against the wall next to them. The stick bizarrely sprouted thick ropes out of the bottom end. There were shelves of brightly colored bottles that all said different words I didn't recognize. Borax, Lysol, bleach, ammonia, chloroform. Next to them were boxes of sponges and rubber gloves, size medium. There were two shelves devoted entirely to rolls of something labeled the Quicker, Thicker Picker-Upper. I had absolutely no idea what those were for, but they were unsettling. The empty middle of the rolls looked like rows of menacing eyes staring at me from the abyss. On the very bottom shelf sat two shiny rocks, one a soft, sparkling pink and the other a brilliant purple, on top of a book labeled Crystal Cleansings for Beginners. I was not aware crystals could be used to clean things, so that was fun to learn. The only other thing on that shelf was a solitary fork. When I turned my head to examine the next shelf, I saw them. There were hundreds of them. "Doomsock, are you seeing what I'm seeing?" I asked her. "What I'm seeing," she said back in a perfect imitation of my voice. "There are hundreds of them. I never dreamed there would be so many." My eyes went wide trying to take them all in. "So many," Doomsock fluted. Stacked neatly on a shelf were hundreds of AI transportation cases. My free hand went to my fanny pack to clutch Mbop, who was hidden inside. "Mbop, we found your people." I knew Mbop couldn't speak back being outside of his ship, but hopefully he could hear me. I brushed my hand over the sides of the AI cases. They were all covered in a thin layer of white dust.
but I could still make out what was underneath. Each AI was identical to the others in terms of shape and material, but each one also had colors and text that were unique to the individual. I picked one off the top and held it in my hand. This one was a female AI. Her name was Whitney Houston. I glanced down the line of cases and noticed several that said Hanson, just like Mbop's real name. Hanson from the Nowhere. Mbop was such a better name. I understood why he preferred that. And suddenly I knew where I was. I was in the Nowhere. I had to be. There was no other explanation. I clutched Whitney Houston in my hand and wondered what she had to say. After hide-and-go-seek was over and I left this place, maybe I could sneak her back to my ship and put her in the black box. I went to place Whitney back on the shelf when I noticed something next to the stacks of AIs. It was black and shiny just like the black box on my ship, only small and circular, and there was a cord with small ear bagels attached to it. It looked almost the perfect size. It couldn't be. The top of the thing said Walkman. Was this technology designed to enable the AIs to walk amongst mankind? That thought terrified and excited me. AIs walking amongst us was unnatural. Or was it? It was time for another adventure. My time in the Nowhere grew more and more exciting I realized I had no idea how long I had been in there. Had I slept? Yes? I wasn't sure. Time must work differently in the Nowhere. I opened the transportation case and slid Whitney out. I then searched for some kind of open button on the Walkman. I located it without much trouble now that I was a technology expert. The top part slid open, revealing the hidden chamber in much the same way as the black box on my ship did. I inserted Whitney Houston and slipped the ear bagels over my head. I pressed play. I was forced to lay on the floor so I wouldn't collapse from the overwhelming beauty of her voice. I came down to the ground slowly into a sitting position, and then leaned back until I was sprawled out on my back staring up at the luminous light burst as Whitney Houston caressed my ears, and the cold stone floor supported me both physically and emotionally. She was so much more articulate and so much more emotional than Mbop. It was almost like there was something about the Nowhere that caused AIs to be more in touch with their emotions. She spoke of things I didn't realize I needed to hear, specifically about the feelings that I may or may not have been having for a certain toad-like flight leader. I let the piercing glow of the light burst wash over me as Whitney's words filled my mind. I shut my eyes as a tear tried to escape as her voice traveled deep into my soul. She asked me questions of love and how a person knew if it was real. I wished that I could answer her questions, but I couldn't offer much in return. I'm sorry, Whitney. I know very little of love, but I think I understand how you feel. I placed my safe hand over my aching heart. I realized at that moment that my feelings for Jurgen were similar to what Whitney spoke of. How could it be that I had so much in common with an AI? I wondered for a moment if I was also an AI, but I obviously wasn't a small round disc. Was it love that I felt for Jurgen? How would I know? I know, responded Doomsock. She was right. I did know. In my heart, I knew the truth. Whitney knew the truth as well. Whitney's powerful voice blocked out all other thoughts and seemed to urge me onward, out of hiding, back to Jurgen. But I wanted so badly to stay in the Nowhere with the shiny crystals and the AIs and the bucket and the mesmerizing light burst. Surely I deserved a nap in the Nowhere, at least until Kimmy found me and hide-and-go-seek was over. I just closed my eyes and rest for a bit. I had almost drifted into a pleasant dream where I had an entire bowl of cottage cheese all to myself, when Whitney ripped me back into consciousness with what I can only describe as a beautiful scream. I didn't know what it meant, but I realized at that moment that I would always love Jurgen. I wanted to spend my life with him. And when you realize you want to spend the rest of your life with somebody, You want the rest of your life to start as soon as possible. I jumped up from the floor, clipped the Walkman onto my belt loop, and burst through the door between the nowhere and the somewhere. I had left MMMBop on the shelf, so I called back to him. I'll come back for you. I promise. I raced through the hallways with Whitney encouraging me through my tiny ear bagels. It was exhilarating to traverse the halls alongside an AI. This Walkman technology truly was revolutionary. My feet pounded the stones as I ran straight to the mess hall, where I had last seen Jurgen. He had been eating dinner then. I burst into the room ignoring my lack of meal vouchers and saw him sitting in the exact same place, only this time with an empty tray. I'd clearly been in the nowhere longer than I thought. It could have been days, weeks, months. I just didn't know. Jurgen, I whisper-yelled. He looked startled. He must have missed me so much. I bet he wondered if he'd ever see me again. I couldn't do it. I couldn't stay away, not without doing this. I grabbed his face on both sides and shoved it towards mine. I puckered my lips and mushed them into his. Once he realized I wasn't attacking him, he relaxed and leaned into the kiss. He relaxed a little too much, causing his tongue to slip out of his mouth and go into mine. It tasted like soup. I finally released him after several minutes of mouth mushing and felt warm and tingly inside. My first kiss. Whitney Houston would be proud. I didn't want her distracting me while I talked to Jurgen, so I activated the power down protocol on the Walkman and slid my ear bagels off my ears. Jurgen looked into my eyes and said, "You are too generous to trifle with me. If your feelings are still what they were before, tell me so at once. My affections and wishes are unchanged, but one word from you will silence me on this subject forever." I smiled at him. My feelings are much different indeed. I now much prefer you to a rat. That is most excellent news. I leaned in and gave him a delicate kiss on the cheek. Spinster, I must confess something. You already told me you loved me. Not that. Something else. What is it? I speak German, Spinster. And so do my parents. They speak only German, actually. That's why I write often phrases on my hand and read them out. I'm learning still very much how to speak your language. Well, that was unexpected. I didn't see why it mattered that much, but it was obviously a big deal to Jurgen. That's okay, Jurgen. I don't know what German is, but I'm sure it's fine. Thank you, said Jurgen. His cheeks were flush and he was smiling. Du bist meine saubere Schnecke. What does that mean? In German, that means you are my magical snail, Spinster Nightlight. And you are mine, Jurgen, I realized I did not know his last name. That seemed problematic, but it was far too late in our relationship to ask, so I left it. Luckily, the Nell attack alarm went off at that very moment, so he didn't realize that I didn't know his last name. I was relieved by that until I realized that the Nell attack alarm was going off. The alarm only went off when there was an infiltration, which hadn't happened in years. The alarm had to be silent, so instead of a sound, all the cavern lanterns in the entire collective would blink on and off rapidly in unison. I'd never experienced the alarm apart from drills, which were announced beforehand. The kids in my old school liked to dance around during the drills because the blinking lights made the moves look funny. We must go, Spinster. They'll need even the reserves for an emergency like this. We must ride and get the collective into hiding. Whales, this is really happening. I feel wildly unprepared to handle this. Same, but I know we can do it. Together. With that, he held out his hand for me to take. I grabbed it firmly, causing him to wince a bit, and we ran down the hallway to where the training ships with the tiny extra wheels were kept. We would use those ships until we had earned our wings. Running along, clutching both Jurgen's hand and Doomsock felt blissful. It was like we were a cute little family. A cute little family running in an underground cavern from an alien attack. Then Jurgen's hand got sweaty and gross, so I dropped it. Wait, Jurgen, I have to go back for MMMBop. Who? MMMBop. I left him in the nowhere. There's no time to explain, but if this really is an infiltration, I can't leave him there. It's not safe.
I used my best sad eyes so he would see my desperation. Of course, but we must hurry. The collective needs us. I turned around and started running in the opposite direction towards the nowhere with Jurgen following close behind. I quickly realized we weren't going to have enough time to run and get Mbop and then run back and get a training ship and still get the collective into hiding in time. Unless we didn't run to begin with. Jurgen, you know how you confessed to me that you speak German? Yes, I remember it quite well. It literally just happened. Well, I have a confession too. Follow me. I used my light line to lead Jurgen to the opening to my secret cave, which Rig and I had been widening over time so the ship would eventually fit through. Mbop stood proudly in the middle of the room. Rig had finished all the repairs and given the ship a final polish. I watched as Jurgen took in the scene and went into shock. What is this? He gasped. This is Mbop, otherwise known as the most advanced technology the collective has ever seen. Or, well, hasn't seen technically because they don't know about it. Mbop is a multi-gear ship complete with handlebar ribbons, storage compartment, and AI. His AI is currently trapped in the nowhere, though. I know it's a lot to take in, but I need you to gawk later because we need to ride this thing. Do you know how to ride it? It looks fast. I guess we'll find out, won't we? I smiled at him confidently and laughed at his panicked facial expression. I couldn't imagine how I had ever been intimidated by this guy. I raised the kickstand and climbed onto the seat that Rig had adjusted to my specifications. I instructed Jurgen to sit on the handlebars facing forward with his feet perched on the small pegs that stuck out on either side of the front wheel. It worked quite nicely. We didn't have helmets, so we had to throw caution to the wind. The whales would protect us. Hopefully. I gave the ship a burst of forward momentum by pushing my feet off the ground, and then I began to pedal. This was the moment of truth. I started conservatively at Gear 1 as I maneuvered us out of the cave. Even with 2 people on board, the ship accelerated like nothing I had experienced before. I wobbled a bit back and forth at the start since I didn't have those extra tiny wheels to help out, but I soon found my stride. Flying down the hallway, I picked up speed to Gear 2, then Gear 3. I didn't dare go above that without helmets. The custom straps that Rig had constructed for the pedals were a lifesaver. My feet would have flown right off otherwise. I made a mental note to thank him later. That is, if the Nell didn't drop a lifebuster and ruin Spam and cottage cheese sandwiches for everyone. After a few minutes, Jurgen seemed to grow more confident in my piloting skills, and he loosened his grip on the handlebars. Then he stretched both of his arms out to the side and tilted his head back as air rushed through his hair, making it flop around freely. "Spinster, I'm flying," he called back. My magical snail looked like he was king of the world. The ribbons on the handlebars fluttered gloriously on either side of me, and Doomsock let out a faint whee. I stopped pedaling and let us glide to a stop gracefully right outside the door to the nowhere. I held Mbop steady while Jurgen hopped off and then dismounted. I was leery of going back into the nowhere and being stuck there for days or months since time worked differently in there, so I had Jurgen stand outside the door and hold my free hand as I reached into the room with my safe hand and grabbed Mbop's AI. I also grabbed 2 crystals in case I needed to clean something. It seemed pragmatic. I slipped the transportation case into my fanny pack and let Jurgen pull me back out of the nowhere. Mission accomplished. "What is that?" Jurgen asked. "It might be easier just to show you." I opened the Walkman and exchanged Whitney Houston for Mbop. I clipped the Walkman on Jurgen's belt loop, and I slid the ear bagels over his ears. We both mounted the ship once again, and I told him to push play. I maybe should have had him push play before I started pedaling because he was so startled that he almost fell off in shock, which was kind of funny. I had become so accustomed to advanced technology that I forgot how alarming it can be at first discovery. "This is amazing!" cried Jurgen. That was the loudest I had ever heard him speak. He seemed to be unaware of his volume due to the ear bagels. I could faintly hear Mbop chattering away as we rode. I still didn't understand Mbop's language, but I didn't need to. I understood how it felt. We were still far off from the first clan we needed to reach, so I pedaled as fast as I could, while Jurgen bobbed his head up and down and grinned like an idiot. I loved seeing him happy.
We zoomed under several of those metal circles on the ceiling that my dad had shown me as a child. Small pinpricks of light shot through them, illuminating the dim space below. I heard sounds resonate down from some of them, and it made me wonder if my theory that they were portals to other worlds was in any way correct. I stared up at the ceiling as I pedaled under the next one. And someone stared back down at me. A face. A human face. Not a Nell. Human. I skidded to an abrupt stop, which almost hurled Jurgen to the ground. What are you doing?" he whispered as he removed the ear bagels and steadied himself. "I saw someone. A human. On the surface. That's impossible. I need to go back." "Spinster, what if it's a Nell? They could be trying to trick you." "Why would a Nell look like a human?" I don't know. I have to be sure." I got off the ship and ran back to where I had seen the face. I stared up at the ceiling, and this time 2 faces stared back down at me from the metal circle, which now very much looked like a portal to another world. The solid metal part with markings was completely gone, leaving the inside of the circle open. Light streamed down. Jurgen caught up to me and stared up at the faces as well. "Whales," he whispered. We stared at them. They stared at us. It felt like a staring contest. I would ultimately lose because the portal was far too bright for my eyes. I kept having to close them to refocus. Then voices from above began to speak. "You have to talk to them at their level or they'll never come with us." It was a woman's voice. "Right, we're asking them to come with us to see the surface." It was a man's voice. "Yes, and mention something about them being worthy. That's super important to them." The woman's voice again. "Okay, here we go. Everyone in position. Do we have the social workers ready back at the truck?" The man's voice answered. "Yes, ma'am. We're all in positions, and here are the sunglasses to give to each person as they come up. Remember, everyone, most of these people have never been exposed to sunlight. They're going to be confused and probably scared. And just remember that they also speak only in whispers. So be extra cautious around auditory stimuli. No music in the vans, no shouting. Speak quieter than you think is necessary. You get the idea. All right, Brandon, go ahead and lower the ladder so we can start the rescue and bring these people up into the world." Jurgen and I watched as a thin ladder descended from the portal above and hit the ground by our feet. We shared a worried glance. Jurgen tried to take my hand, but he reached for my safe hand, which had Doomsock on it, so he changed his mind. A woman started to climb down the ladder. "Spinster, what if they are Nell?" "They don't look like Nell. I mean, I know we don't know what Nell look like, but don't you think we'd know if we saw one?" "That's a good point." The woman stepped onto the cavern floor and turned to look at us. She smiled. "Hi, I'm Alanic. You have been deemed worthy. I'd like for you to come with me to the surface." Worthy. We had been deemed worthy. "Jurgen, did you hear that?" I looked over at him with a grin spreading the entire expanse of my face. "Yes, Spinster, I did. I've been waiting my whole life to hear that." He looked like he might cry. "Excellent," said Alanic. "Just put on these sunglasses and climb up the ladder. Brandon will help you at the top." "Can I bring my ship?" Your what?" I pointed back at Mbop. "Oh, your bike. I don't see why not. I'll grab that for you and we'll pull it up." Alanic walked over and got Mbop. She didn't seem at all intimidated by the advanced technology, which means she must have been given access to the vast knowledge stored in the minds of the space whales. Jurgen nodded to me, and I put the sunglasses over my normal glasses, which was awkward, and climbed up the ladder. He followed right behind me. I was conscious of the view he was getting of me from below and was careful not to fart. Brandon pulled me up out of the portal and I stepped onto a strange, hard surface that was kind of like rock, only it had cracks with delicate green things popping out of them. I stared down at the green things trying to figure out what they were while sounds bombarded me from every direction. So many sounds. Horns, voices, rumblings, the occasional ding-ding of a ship. Someone yelling at a ridiculous volume about not wanting mustard on a hot dog. Whatever that was. It was loud even when I plugged my ears with my fingers. Suddenly, I realized that I had been staring down when I should be looking up. I took my fingers out of my ears, lifted my head a bit, and saw bright yellow ribbons surrounding the area that read, "Caution." Behind the ribbons stood a crowd of noisy people. One person looked right at me and called my name. He looked almost exactly like my dad, only old. Weird. I raised my head even higher and saw the sky. The sky! This was what my dad had wanted me to see all those years before. I understood now. How could he have seen something like this and not wanted to share it? I wanted to show everyone. I turned to the man who had lowered the ladder. "It's the sky, Brandon," I whispered. Yup, sure is," he answered without even looking up. What was wrong with him? How could he just stare down at his notebook and scribble things when the sky was right there? It was so big and so blue. The mock pit simulation hadn't done it justice at all. On one side of it was a large orange orb that resembled the light burst from the nowhere, only giant. It was so bright that it was painful to look at, but I couldn't pull my eyes away. As I stared at the light burst, a familiar strain of tin can poop smell crossed my nostrils. It was almost like my dad was right there with me in that moment, just out of reach. Love you, Dad. Thanks for teaching me to aim for something more grand. The sky was indeed more grand than anything I could have ever imagined. "Oh, honey, it's not good to stare at the sun," a woman said. "It will hurt your eyes." "Oh, I didn't know that," I whispered as I continued to stare directly at the sun. I felt Jürgen come up behind me and grab my hand, the free one this time. He joined me in staring at the sun. "It's beautiful, Spinster." I looked over at his smile, which was the only thing brighter than the sun, and leaned over to kiss him for the very first time beneath the sky, as I thanked the whales above. Amateur log. Breaking news. This just in, over 200 cult members were rescued from an underground cave system below New York City today. We aren't sure how long they had been down there, but the members span at least 3 generations. They are being referred to as the Skywart cult, since they are all being treated for unusual and highly contagious warts and have spent most of their time above ground marveling at the sky, which they have never seen before. Rescuers have confirmed the cult had been using chamber pots and emptying them directly into the sewer system that connected to the caverns they were living in. Wow, Diane, that is both troubling and ingenious. It really is, Mike. The cult also used electric lanterns that were powered by generators charged by pedaling bicycles, which again is both troubling and ingenious, as you said. Did they have any modern technology of any kind, Diane? Great question, Mike. The only technology found underground were computers from the early 90s with no access to the internet. No internet? Wow, Diane, I can't even imagine. That's an interesting comment coming from someone born in the 1950s who spent a good portion of their life without the internet, Mike. That's a good point, Diane. What else can you tell us about these people who have been living underground? Well, they will of course undergo psychological evaluations and rigorous medical testing. Their belief system taught them that Earth was destroyed, so they all think they were living on a different planet this entire time. Who knows what their lives will be like after they learn that everything they thought they knew was a lie. I don't envy them, Mike. Nor do I, Diane. Meanwhile, in better news, we are now just 3 days away from landing the first manned spacecraft on Mars. Isn't that incredible? It sure is, Mike. So much work by so many people went into this moment. Truly is a remarkable time to be alive. Truly is, Diane. And the Mars mission has gone off without a hitch, except for one crew member who suffered hallucinations from dehydration and saw visions of whales floating around up in space. Can you imagine that, Diane? Whales. I simply cannot, Mike. but that seems to be under control, and the crew member is being kept away from the windows just in case. Couldn't have asked for a smoother mission up to this point. You really couldn't, Mike. Up next, is your favorite breakfast cereal made of particle board? Find out after the break. This has been Skyward, a Skyward series parody, written by M.G. Bayer, read by Conrad Mishuk. Acknowledgements. This entire project was worth doing purely because it led me to discover that the band Hanson is still together and still touring and still putting out new albums. I was entirely unaware of this. In case you were also living under a rock or in an underground cult, Hanson has released 10 albums to date, and their latest one, Red, Green, Blue, is delightfully folky. I am officially in my Hanson era, with over 2 decades of previously unknown music to consume. Join me. You know you want to. So first off, I would like to thank Hanson. I have many heartfelt childhood memories jumping on my bed screaming the still unknown lyrics to MMMBop, the demo of which came out on my 8th birthday. So, thank you, Hanson. A whopper of a thank you to audiobook narrator Conrad Mishuk for once again lending his sonorous voice to one of my weird projects. If you are a podcast person and like irreverent audio dramas, you can listen to Conrad's voice even more on his podcast, Kakos Industries, where they do evil better. You can find it along with other goodies at conradmishuk.com. That's ConradMiszuk.com. I hope you enjoyed the musical interludes if you listened to the audiobook. They were designed to immerse you in the sound of a space whale worship ceremony and were composed and recorded by Briggs Kennedy. Each musical clip is unique and part of a larger piece of music that provides the full space whale worship experience. The full piece can be found at doomsock.com. A big thanks to Briggs for always being down for whimsical projects. Thank you to everyone who read this parody novella, with a special thanks to those who had to trudge through it in its earliest forms. My one and only alpha reader was Lindsay Vonda Hay, whom I selected because she is a horrible liar, so I would know immediately if she hated it. My beta readers were Mick Bayer, who is the reason the HOA was involved in this, Becca Williams, who provided the pumpkin spice lattes, and Zach Christman, whose intense love of puppets inspired Doomsock. Thanks to my editor, Ron Rozelle, whose line edit included punctuation and word choice corrections for direct quotes from Charles Dickens and Jane Austen, to which he commented, "No great author is safe from my tinkering," after which he, I can only assume, broke out into fits of maniacal laughter. You know, the kind that goes, "Bwah-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha," and not "ha-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha." I know that last sentence was far too long, but Ron isn't editing this part, so he can't stop me. Thank you to all my English teachers, especially Pat Soledad, who has been reading my work and providing me with feedback and inspiration for almost 20 years. Teachers never stop being teachers. Thanks to the Sanderson Collectors Guild and the Chicken Scouts for all the internet merrymaking. I never believed you could make real friends on the internet before meeting this motley crew. They continue to teach me how fun it is to be part of a fandom. Thanks, of course, to Brandon Sanderson himself. I believe the best parodies are written from a place of love and respect for the original work, which is easy to do with Brandon's books, of which there are 1 billion and counting. Brandon, thanks for lowering the ladder so we can climb up and see what you see. Thank you also to my 2 whippets, Scholar and Oxford, for all the snuggles and reminders to go outside and look at the sky. And finally, thank you to the space whales. I won't name names since they prefer to remain anonymous, but you know who you are.